fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and while the D's once again managed to pull one out of the fire, and I'm not sure my little old heart can take any more close matches decided at the death. Joining me tonight to dissect another close one is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Binman. Good evening to the Demonland listeners. Well, hopefully tonight we'll find out whether a 4-point win or a 1-point win is best for Andy's MFCSS and probably his voice and heart.
Well, my voice is a little scratchy, not from the game, but I would just prefer a nice 4-5 goal win than either of those. But I'll take anything. I just can't take these close matches anymore. Also joining us tonight to counterbalance the negative media bias around the D's is Beerman. Good evening, Beerman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. Don't you love footy? That was just something else. 2 weekends in a row, get to go to the MCG, 40,000 other fans. Last week, I left floating on air after our magnificent comeback, and this week I just left so relieved to go away with that win. But I'll absolutely counter any negative media bias. Not that I've actually heard, I haven't been listening to much negative media bias about that particular performance by the D's, but it was, I think that it's really important what might easily get lost in the wash-up of that game on the back of last week about it all being about how, fantastic Brisbane were and that they gave it up and, we basically did nothing last week. It was all Brisbane just handing the game to us on a platter. I think what might get forgotten in the midst of time in this game is the fantastic performance to wrest the momentum back. I mean, you can feel it. I've got a friend staying with me who's a journalist out from Germany for the Women's World Soccer. She's German. She's out for the Women's World Cup. And I took her along to the game, and we were talking about how soccer and football, the similarities around the momentum, in sport. It's all about momentum, taking advantage of momentum when you've got it, stopping the opposition taking advantage of momentum when they've got it, and wresting control back when when the opposition have it. And they were fantastic, the Crows, in that in that last quarter. They were fantastic right through the game. So I thought it was a brilliant effort to get that game back on our terms and keep fighting out. So a really, really terrific win, and banked the 4 points, 8 points clear of fifth, and we're in a better position now than we were in 21 and 22.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the comparisons. Can you take us, if you know it off the top of your head, just where we were at this time in those seasons? I do know for a fact that in round 19 of 21 and 22, that was the two Bulldogs losses in both of those years. It was the time we lost at the G when there was no one there. We lost to the Bulldogs in 2021, and then in 2022 it was that shootout at Marvel Stadium when we lost, but I can't remember where we were sitting at the ladder at those times. So, B-Man, if you have,
I don't
have
know
it in your head
because I'm guessing. I just remember the discussion on Demonland. But in next time I get a chance, I'll have a quick look because you can. I looked at them today for another reason, but you can look at the ladder after each round, going right back. So I'll have a look in a sec. But we definitely weren't 2 games clear, and we're effectively 3 games clear because 2 games in percentage.
Well, I can tell you
that
I have it.
No one's coming. At this point, remember in that game both games against the Dogs, the discussion on Demonland and elsewhere and on the podcast was all about, geez, forget the grand final. We'd be lucky if we still make top 4. There'll still be people on Demonland who reckon we'll drop out of the top 4. But this year with 6 games to go, is it 6 games to go? 5 games to go. We're in a really strong position. It's inconceivable for us to imagine us not making the top 4 from here with our run home, even if we don't win, all of our games. So 2 games and percentages, I say, is equal to 3 games. And it really goes to my point that I've been making all season is, again, with the media narrative that is way off the charts about how even this competition is. I keep coming back to it. It is not an even competition. The top 4 teams are a long way ahead of the next teams. I think, Geelong could make a case, but it's hard to win from outside 5 and outside the top 4, I should say. And I really, really rate the Crows, and I really rate GWS. So even that, that's worth noting, since we got beaten by GWS in a game that we 100% should have won. They've been awesome since then. And now everyone's cottoning on to how good they are. They're in 6th or 7th position, and Adelaide could easily be, in 6th or 7th, pushing for, 5th or 6th as well. And I still think they'll make it, actually, a dangerous side if they do. So, we're in a really good spot. But again, not that, people will be talking about that, because, if you speak 95% of the time about Collingwood, there's not much time for the rest of the clubs.
Well, the important thing for Demon supporters is this is the 3rd year in a row we finished top 4. And everybody, sort of ascribes to the theory correctly, I think, that if you want to win it, you've got to be top 4.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think we'll touch on it a bit later, but just to cut my own lunch, because I prepared, that was why I was looking back actually on the ladder. But, this idea that Collingwood are a great team is just, is so frustrating, because, we've got a better claim to greatness than Collingwood do, because exactly what you're saying, George, is we won a flag in 21, finished on top of the ladder. We finished second after the home and away season last year. With 5 rounds to go, we're a lock for top 4. That's a flag and 3 top 4 finishes within 3 years. That trumps getting knocked out in the finals 2-1 last year by Collingwood and a fancy home and away record. So, I think that we really should be applauding the club. The media narrative should be, well, look how strong this football club is. And I'll go back to what Goody said right since he was appointed senior coach. His focus is on creating a team that has a window of opportunity for 5 to 10 years of winning flags. So, it's about creating the biggest opportunity to win a flag every year, acknowledging a lot of luck, a lot of things have to go right to win a flag, but you've got to be in it to win it. And to win it, you've got to be top 4. And so for the 3rd year in a row to be top 4, I don't know, Andy, when was the last time we had consecutive years finishing in the top 4?
Oh, it certainly wasn't any time before the last time we won a premiership previous to this one, because
so it might be back as far back as 64.
Probably not even then. We're probably into the late 50s.
1950s, yeah.
But I'm glad that you guys think we're locked for the top 4 with 5 rounds to go. But I might not be as confident.
Even you, Andy, with your MFCSS, if you poisoned the ladder predictor and put your MFCSS malware into the ladder predictor, you still couldn't come up with a scenario of us missing the top 4. Because keep in mind, everyone forgets this every single year. The teams below us have to play each other. And so, they knock each other out of contention.
I might have to do my doomsday scenario for next week's show. But just to counter your point about where we were sitting at round 19 in the last 2 previous seasons, 21 and 22.
Asterisk is it an asterisk or asterisk? Is that it's not quite the same equivalent round, is it? Because there's one more game this season.
Yeah, but the game's at the end of the extra game, you can say, is at the end of the year. But at round 19,
no, it's not.
All right, but we've still only played 19 games. I'm comparing apples to apples. So round 19.
But 4 games to go in the season, not 5. Right. That's the difference.
Well, just humour me, okay? It's 19 games into the season. Forget how many there are to go. That's even worse that there's an extra game that we could lose. Round 19 in 2021, we were 3rd on the ladder behind Western Bulldogs and Geelong. We were half a game behind. I'm assuming that we had our draw against Hawthorn, yes, the week before in round 18. So we were half a game behind them and in 3rd place. And in 2022...
hold on, but how many points clear of 5th?
How many points?
That's the key metric.
No, not that. 5th was on 40. We were on 54 points. So I can't... however many wins that is. They were on 48. Brisbane and Sydney were 5th
there you go.
and 6th.
I was right. 6 points, not 8 points, and percentage.
Yeah. So... and then 2022, we were 2nd on the ladder on 52 points, a game behind Geelong, who was in 1st. And 5th position was Freo on 50 points. So we were only 2 points clear of 5th
Thanks
spot.
for coming.
So there you go. So yes, we are in a better
I'm glad
position.
I'm glad my anecdotal vibe was on the money.
So yes, you were on the money. Before we get into the reviews, I just want to make mention that tonight is our 200th Demonland podcast. We've covered every single game since round 1, 2017. The 200 episodes include almost all of the games since and any of the standalone interviews that we've done with players, coaches and officials past and present. We were there for our return to the final series after a 12-year absence. We were there for our drought-breaking premiership, and hopefully we'll be here for the next one. And I just want to thank a few people who have been a big part of the podcast over the 200 episodes. My co-hosts, Jack Viney, Whispering Jack, Super Mikado, you might know him from Twitter as @DemonBlog, and of course George and Bin Man. These guys rock up every single week, win, lose or draw, and luckily we win more often than we lose nowadays. These guys don't get paid to do this, with the exception of maybe some best and fairest tickets that I occasionally throw their way. They do it for the love of Demonland and for the love of talking about this great club that we all support and barrack for. So a big thank you to my co-hosts. Without them, there is no show because I'm not as analytical about the game as they are. My emotions get in the way of any of that. They've taught me that just kick the bloody thing is not a sound tactic. And even though I still yell, kick the bloody thing every single game, I hope our listeners have learned a thing or two from the podcast over the 200 episodes, because I sure have. So thank you, boys. And I also want to thank all the Demonlanders and listeners that have contributed to the podcast in the form of questions, comments, feedback, reviews, calls, and voicemails. All those contributions are a massive part of the show. So thank you from the bottom of this little red and blue heart that beats true. And I wish I could name you all, but there simply isn't time. And I hope that the shout outs that I give you on the podcast each week is enough thanks for your generous contributions of content. And thank you to you, the listeners. Without our audience, we're just speaking into a microphone, into a computer. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy what we produce every week. So here's to another 200 plus episodes. Hopefully we can all celebrate another flag or more along the way. So go Demons.
For people listening, we're on a video so we can see each other. So it was a really nice touch. You wouldn't have seen this. It doesn't work well for radio. But it was a nice touch, Andy, you running through the banner that the Demon Army made for you.
They should have
you've done your hammy. But
shout out to the Demon Army this week. I thought they introduced a new thing this week where they were sort of, when the opposition was kicking out a goal, they were sort of razzing them a bit, like there was a bit of noise going on. Did you notice that? They were, I don't know what sound they were making.
What I did notice though is, again, for the second week in a row, and this is not being facetious, or for the second week in a row, the noise of the Melbourne fans made a difference to a game of footy. I have no doubt about it. Melbourne were loud. We were loud at the ground, and I'm positive it made a difference last week, and I'm positive it made a difference this week. So these fans, if you're thinking about Sunday, it's going to be beautiful weather, maybe a little bit of rain, 1 mil was what's predicted, but get to the ground because it 100% makes a difference. And we get 4 points on next Sunday. Even Andy couldn't find a scenario to have us not making top 4. I'm thinking we'll finish second.
And there'll be we're going to talk about that a bit later on. We do have a question about that. There'll be a lot of Tigers fans there, and they're going to be loud and they're up and about. They've won a few games. They've got a sniff of finals. They're not quite in 9th spot yet, but if they have a win, they're in the. I'll talk about it later. If they have a win, they're in the top 8 because Bulldogs and GWS are playing each other, and one of them will drop out. So we need to win to put a dent in their finals hope. Each week, I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us 5-star reviews and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback, and we'll read them out on the show. The 5 stars really do help boost the podcast, and they do get more people listening. Jackie Spam writes, the best source of Demons analysis on the planet. Are you looking for a balanced and an objective football podcast? Well, look elsewhere, because this is just for the D's fans. The man named after Woody and Buzz Lightyear's owner is as passionate and one-eyed as it gets, so you can forget about any sense of impartiality. Are you searching for superficial analysis a la David King? Well, keep looking, because the male rubbish receptacle dives deeper than the Titan Ocean Gate when it comes to the stats. Comments, feedbacks, reviews, calls. That was my other page when it comes to all the love. Sometimes it seems that he may just implode like said submarine when he critiques David King's analysis. And King George on the outer brings a measured touch of class and distinction when he takes a break from travelling the globe as worldwide Demonland ambassador. The three amigos are passionate, well-researched, and I love listening to them each and every week. Thanks for all your time and effort, boys. It's one of my favourite podcasts. It's mutual celebration. It's free therapy. It's all things Melbourne Demons, and I love your work. Well, that's how you write a 5-star review. Thanks for that, Jackie. Sorry, I included some of my notes from the other segment in that. Really, thank you. Much appreciated. Thanks for listening. Red Soxman writes, what a great podcast. It's the highlight of my week. Very informative, interesting podcast, but also presented with a sense of humour. Great interaction between the three hosts. I trust these three presenters much more than any in the media. Thanks, Red Soxman. I'm pretty sure that's another Demonlander, so come on, Demonlanders, help us out with a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. Beanlander writes, excellent podcast, entertaining analysis and insight from Andy, George and Binman. That's short and to the point, but thank you, Beanlander. Another Demonlander and frequent contributor to the podcast in the form of our listener questions, Engorged Onion writes, a fine show. The Demonland podcast is a gem that combines wisdom, humour and insightful analysis. Andy, George and Binman dissect the game with a depth that surpasses general media pundits. It's a delightful journey through our specific footy landscape like no other. Thank you, Engorged Onion. Your comments and contributions to the podcast and Demonland much appreciated. Redleggers writes, great analysis of the greatest team each week. Andy, George and Binman consistently deliver with a passion. They're well-prepared, in-depth analysis of the D's performance each week. Listening to the analysis is even better these days now that we are on the winning side of the ledger more often than not. Keep up the great work, gents. Thank you, Redleggers. It's much easier rocking up to do this podcast when you're consistently winning, and I do not envy any Eagles fans' podcasts at the moment. And finally, and we did have a lot of 5-star reviews this week. Keep them coming. We really do appreciate them. Demonic writes, unashamedly obsessed. Love the podcast. Thanks. Well, thank you for those kind words, Demonic. And thank you for listening and taking the time to write a review. Keep the feedback coming. Give us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts. Please don't forget to click the link write the review link and write that review, as well as give us the 5 stars, and we'll read it out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Threads, and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post that under our podcast post each week. Just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. If you want to chat with other Demons fans and you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com. Sign up. You can chat with other Demons fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. And in addition to being able to post questions or comments for this show, there are also multiple topics and threads discussing all things Demons related. So join in on the conversation. If you would like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, then please give us a call on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute. I'll bring you on when there is a break in our conversation. And during the week, you can give that number a call, leave us a message. We'll play it on the show, like we got one from Salty a bit later on. If you are listening live, you can join us in the chat room by heading on over to demonland.com/podcast. We'll try to be more attentive to the comments and questions posted there. My co-host will keep an eye on it. We are live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Now, boys, before we get into the match wrap-up, you wanted to have a brief chat about the AFLW draw and fixture that's come out. Who wants to take that away?
I thought we were leaving that to next week.
Okay, that's right. No,
I can.
No. We are going to leave it for next week because I want to spend a bit more time on it.
Deep dive next week with George, deep dive into the fixture, but my understanding is, unfortunately, it's 10 rounds.
Yeah.
And our first game is when, George?
1st of September, if I remember. Yeah, 1st of September.
Against the Pies. And
yeah.
Well, I look forward to your sort of deep dive next week. But, just as a general thing, I wish they'd just put all the games, as we've talked about a few times, at a decent footy ground. And, I really think the AFL have dropped the ball on the AFL, have dropped the ball on the AFW, unfortunately, and after a brilliant start and the the wages and all of that, sorting that stuff to a degree. But so I really look forward to your analysis next week, George, on that.
Yeah, it's from my perspective really sad that we've got 18 teams and we've got 10 rounds of football for the 18 teams and playing at all sorts of strange and weird locations. But we'll talk about that next week. And we'll be able to talk more about the players that we've got in the side this year. But leave that till next week, Andy.
All right, no problem. Let's get on to the match review. And as I mentioned in my intro to tonight's show, I'm not sure how many more close calls that my heart can take. I actually had to vacate my seat after the Crows' final goal so that I could just pace for the remaining few minutes. And as I said, why can't we just have a regular 4 to 5 goal win where we're never troubled? I'm not asking for much. I'm not greedy. I don't want an 80-point thumping. My blood pressure just wants a vanilla win. Unfortunately, that wasn't to be the case this week. This match, like last week, was full of momentum swings. Every time we opened up a 4 to 5 goal lead, the Crows would reel us back in. A 5-goal lead midway through the second was narrowed to 13 points at halftime. Then again, a 5-goal lead during the third was squandered to scores being levelled with 15 minutes remaining. And then the D's got back out to a 20-point lead before the Crows once again got to within a kick with minutes to go. And despite their current ladder position, the Crows are a good yet inconsistent side. They have a very good record against the top four sides, beating both Port and Brisbane and taking it up to the Pies in both their encounters, losing by 1 and 2 points respectively. The D's actually now hold the biggest winning margin over the Crows of all the top 4 sides. Yet when we beat them, the media nuffies lament that the Crows threw it away. And when Collingwood scrape home against them, it's this Magpie team is just magnificent. Now, I'm not suggesting that our win was exceptional. Perhaps we did scrape home, but I will happily bank those 4 points as compensation for our robbery at Adelaide Oval in 2021. And fortunately for the Demons, it was our opposition that failed to kick straight from set shots early in the match. Had they kicked truer, then perhaps the result would have been different and the mood on tonight's podcast would certainly have been a lot darker. In the absence of Clayton Oliver, Jack Viney once again stood tall in the middle. 27 possessions, 13 contested, 5 clearances, 7 inside 50s, 520 metres gained and a goal. In just the last quarter, he was immense with 10 disposals, 6 contested, 4 clearances, all from the centre bounce, mind you, and 4 inside 50s. Kade Chandler made a welcome return as part of our small forward brigade. He was able to find space in the forward 50 on a number of occasions and nailed home 3 goals. Cozzy Pickett continued on from his return to form last week with 20 possessions and 2 goals, 3 behinds. Importantly, Captain Max was able to kick a couple of long-range snags, and from where I sat, I reckon he kicked that last one as well. Big man, you can interrupt. Where you sit, did that look like a goal?
No.
Oh, bug me.
I was spewing. I was like, he should have kicked it.
Thank you, Kane Corns, for having the contrary view to what I'm thinking. We used the super sub Joel Smith very well, and he had an immediate impact when coming on, kicking a goal and almost snagging another before hitting up Wowie Jr. for the match winner. It wasn't the prettiest of wins, but make no mistake, those 4 points are crucial. We now have a 2-game and percentage buffer for 5th spot with a favourable draw going into the run home. Let's hope we can start putting some teams to bed early and not giving them a sniff. I don't think my nerves can take much more of this. Anything you want to add, George?
No, I think that pretty well sums it up. I really enjoyed the game in respect. It was Adelaide are a seriously good side, and the fact that they've been able to take it up to all 4 top 4 sides this year indicate that their unfortunate position is they don't seem to be able to win much away from the Adelaide Oval, but they're playing the sort of football that the top four sides are playing at the moment. The way they attack the ball, the way they come, the intercepts that come from the back line, and then the running through the middle of the field, that's emblematic of, it started with Richmond a couple of years ago, but certainly emblematic of the way that the top four sides do play these years. It's exciting football to watch. You can never guarantee that the game's over, because they can turn, like the Collingwoods, like the Brisbanes, like the Ports. They can come back from 4 and 5, like us as well, can come back from 4 or 5 goals down, and all of a sudden the game's on the line yet again. So, it was enjoyable to watch. It was enjoyable to watch the individual competitions or contests around the ground. To get the win for us was a real big bonus, because it gave us that buffer, and now in fourth position. I think we're starting to see the players in the side at the moment really competing to keep their spot in the side, which will be critical over the next 5 weeks, because they can all see the writing on the wall now. We're playing finals again and really challenging for the premiership. So that's the impetus for the players. So, a great game all round.
Yeah, I totally concur. And just a quick comment of just my thoughts about the game, Andy. But it's funny what you're saying about, I do recall in 21 and the first half of 22, you saying, God, it's boring, can't we? We're grinding out these 4-goal wins, and, we win between 18 points and 26 points. Can't we put teams away? It's like Demon fans are never happy. Like that game, you play a game like that, this is the whole point. And you're exactly right, George. As I said last week, I really rate the Crows. They play a top 4 game. They've got all the right pieces in place. I think they're a team on the rise. They're super fit. But the key is what you said, is they play top 4 footy. I reckon they've taken the best of Collingwood style, which is that fast run and gun, use the corridor, use their skills. They've got better forward line, arguably, than Collingwood, combined with our forward half footy, which Collingwood is as well. But also, I think they've got a much more Melbourne-like defensive system than the Crows, than the Pies do. So I actually, I think that they're not as vulnerable in some ways as the Pies. But a point about that style of football, which we mirrored in this game, is that the whole point about it is that if you take the risks, you often give up goals. And so they did. That's why they weren't able to keep that momentum going, because they kept attacking and gave the ball back to us, and we scored, and vice versa. But I'm curious, Andy, have you watched the replay of the game?
No, not yet.
Right. So the reason I ask is because I've talked about this before, but my favourite way of watching footy is to go to watch the game live and then come home and watch the replay, assuming we win. But I find watching live at the ground a completely different experience than watching live on TV, in terms of my sense of what the game looks like and how well both the Ds and our opposition are playing. Sometimes I think we're playing better than we are, but often I think. I'm not clear on who's playing well, but it was a funny game because we got that margin, and it always felt like we were, 1 goal away from breaking their back. But, I think that, so for me, I can see what you're saying about, we grounded out, but it was actually a really high quality game. When I watched the replays, I watched half of it on Sunday night, last night, and I watched the second half just before the show tonight. It was a terrific game of footy. Actually kudos to the commentary team. I thought they did a really good job. It was a really even commentary, and I thought they called it really well. But if I watch the game live, the commentators often have a big influence on my perception of the game, in part because of what they're saying, subconsciously, and they repeat stats, but also because on the television, you have the score always on it, and they're always rolling stats through, like, how many inside 50s, contested possessions, all of those sorts of things. So you get a feel for the game from a statistical point of view on telly that you don't at the game. And at the game, I never listened, as I've said before, I never listened to the radio and only checked the stats at half time. When watching the replay after watching the game live, my sense often when watching the replay after watching the game live, my sense is that the Ds or the Oppo have played much better than the commentators' analysts suggest on the coverage, but sometimes, and this was an example of that, the opposite is true. Well, it wasn't until halfway. I thought we were dominant. Watching live, I get really, I'm emotionally involved in the game, and yesterday I was really unusually nervous during the game because I was, obviously really keen for us to win, but it was that tension of us, one more goal and we've got this game in the bag, because there's that magical, statistically 30 points is very difficult to come back from. Not many teams, any time a team gets out to 30 points, that statistically it's very infrequent that teams come back, despite what they say about 5 goals is nothing in modern footy. So in the game, I'm just I don't really get a sense of it, and that was certainly how it felt. But live, I thought we were the far superior team at least in the first half. And then I checked the stats. I was really surprised to see the stats. The numbers, weren't nearly as overwhelming as I thought they would be our way. And it was a much closer game on the paper. And in fact, you looked at it, if we supported the Crows, if I supported the Crows, I'd be thinking, we're right in this match. And of course, it came down to the accuracy. So, so I think it was that sense of conflating the score with where the teams are at, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like we were accurate, they weren't. I mean, they really, they really missed their chances. And I didn't read this during the game, so this is from the AFL timeline that I like to check. So I just checked it earlier. And this info from the timeline app captures my misreading of how I got the game wrong live, which this is reading from the thing. The accuracy of Melbourne separated these teams in the first half. Adelaide has scored 0-6 from shots at goal in the 30 to 50 metre range, and we were 4-1 from equivalent shots at goal. Adelaide led 31-14 and forward, 50 disposals, with Rankin with 5 leading all players, and the Crows led 11-1 in forward tackles, and we'll talk about that later, I think, and 14-10 shots at goals, including misses. They were in that game at halftime despite the score, and even when we kicked away in that third. So I thought they were terrific. And watching the game just there in the second half, it was a high-quality game of footy. It really was. If you were a neutral observer, you couldn't help but enjoy that end-to-end footy.
Yes. All right. Well, with that, Big Man, as a lead in to your stats files, I thought I'd place this listener question a bit early from Kiwi D here, because you'll no doubt cover his or her question in your stats. Kiwi D says, excellent podcast. The past few weeks, guys, top stuff as always. I thought our pressure was well down this week. Would be interested to hear what the pressure gauge was for this match, as Big Man will no doubt speak to this in his stats file segment. We had one measly tackle inside 50 to 13 for the Crows. We averaged 12 a game usually, so we were well down on that stat. Adelaide averaged 10, so they were well up with their 13. The Crows had 69 tackles for the match, up on their average 66 a game, whilst we only managed 47 tackles, well down on our average of 60 a game. So, Big Man, let's hear about the stats and perhaps start with our pressure, or perhaps lack thereof, based on our tackle count.
Well, I might leave the tackle count to later, because that's an interesting question about that 11-1 inside 50. It was actually 10-1 at halftime, so they only had one more tackle inside 50. That was one at halftime. I checked the stats. And
it was 13 to 1. So
13-1. It was 10-1 at halftime, and it was one of the numbers that I think maybe it flashed up on the screen at the G, but it's like a number of stats at halftime caught me by surprise. And but on the pressure, like, for me, again, I'll talk about this a bit later, but the game was really similar to last week in terms of the way it was really a transition game back and forward. And but what the difference was the pressure. In fact, the pressure was really high in this game. So despite it being a lot of open space, a lot of running, the pressure was really high. So for the match, remember 180s AFL average and 200s considered elite in these pressure numbers. The total for the match was them 191, which is right up there. That is good going, and we were 183. But the breakdown for the quarters is fascinating reading it. So it was first quarter, good pressure by us, 184. And again, this is sort of reinforcing my point about this, I guess, not giving the Crows credit that they deserve for how well they played in that first half. Their pressure rating was 194, which is right up there. And they really tried hard. They worked hard to get that game back on their terms. Second quarter, and this is the first time, I didn't check this, but I think this is the first time we've knocked over 200 since the Pies game, I'm pretty sure. So the second quarter, we went to 201 with our with our pressure rating, which is elite. That is top shelf. And they weren't far behind in that second quarter, 198. So that's a big pressure quarter, 201 to 198. The third quarter was 177 to 172, which is sort of how it felt. We got our goals, and I thought they fought back super well. The last quarter is the really interesting one. So we only managed 168 in that last quarter, which is interesting because, I felt like we ran out the game pretty well. But, my sense was last week that we're not quite at our running best, and that's how it felt at the game. So 168, they were 202 in that last quarter. That is for a team who I don't know if you listened to the presses this week, but Nick's has talked about the fitness. It's a theme. They consider themselves the fittest team in the AFL, I've heard, and they ran out that game hard. And 202 in the last quarter at the MCG was massive. I thought it was really, really interesting, Nick's comment about they love playing at the MCG because of it's bigger, the dimensions of the G, and jokingly said that he wants the Adelaide Oval to increase the boundaries. I read that as a comment about their fitness. He's saying we can outrun anyone is the message. Then that's the Burgess, that's the Burgess psychological spin, isn't it? So the pressure points is really fascinating. So the top 5 players were number 1 track. Gus was second. JJ Jordan was third, which I found really interesting because I thought he had a middling game in some respects, and I might talk a bit about that later. Jack Viney, what a beast, as you said at the top, Andy. He was fourth, and Cozzy was in fifth. But what was really interesting was the season average pressure. So for the points are physical pressure acts, the players accrue them. Physical pressure acts are worth 3.75 points. Closing acts are worth 2.25 points. Chasing acts are 1.5 points, and corralling are 1.2 points to arrive at a player's aggregated pressure points. And so Track had 26 pressure acts for 63 pressure points. The interesting thing, his season average is 48. So he really took it up another level. Gus, his season average for pressure is 32, 62 in this match. That is just absolutely fantastic leadership from Track and Gus. Really, that's the game right there for me. JJ's season average is 23. He clocked in at 58 for this match with 27 pressure, the most number of pressure acts in the team, which was awesome. You won't be surprised that Jack Viney's pressure average is 54.1, and he came in at 54. So it's just his standard pressure game, which is super high. And Cozzy, similarly, he's 43.1. Season average was right on that for 44. So that was huge performance, particularly from those two leaders, Track and big thumbs up, and kudos to JJ as well, because as I said, I thought he had a bit of a middling game, so that sort of pressure is really elite and will go a long way to keeping him in the team. Some of the key stats for the Ds, metres gained were almost the same, so that was fascinating. A very similar, I thought it was a really even game. They performed really well. We performed really well, so I disagree, Andy, as a middling win, or that I thought we played really high quality footy. The contested possessions was a really interesting one, because this is really, if you boil it all down, the number one stat Goody would pick if he was to tell a story about any individual match's contested possessions. We were plus 21. And I might have confused that, but I think we were plus 10 contested possessions after 6 minutes of play. And I think it leveled up much closer. That didn't extend to half time. So we put contested possessions together in the second half. So plus 21 is massive for a team. Adelaide, a pretty good pressure team as well. This one was really important, and it's interesting in the conversation about our tackles inside 50. But our ground ball gets, we were plus 8, and they are a fantastic ground ball get team. So that is a stat that the club will absolutely love. We plus 5 in stoppage clearances, plus 2 in centre clearances. We were plus 5 marks inside 50, which is that really surprised me, that number. Plus 15 hit outs, plus 2 for hit outs to advantage. not much there in terms of that. So the time in forward half, again, was really, really fascinating. For the match, it was 51-49. Now, our goal would be something like 64 for a Melbourne thing, and it goes back to the way we played. So it's directly related to that 13 tackles to 1 inside 50. It's this conversation about forward half. We didn't play our normal game. Our normal game is to trap it in the forward line and put a huge amount of pressure on and keep it in there. We played open, and that's what happens when you get a fast transition game. They were brilliant up there in their forward line, though. Rankin was just a sensational performance, and he's a gun. Probably the biggest stat for me that was the most interesting was turnovers were they were +5 in turnovers. Again, that's a critical stat for us. So that just shows the pressure that they put on, but it also shows how aggressive we were with our ball use. I can think of so many turnovers where we coughed up the ball in that first 25 minutes of play. Track was horrible. Steve May was horrible. So we turned the ball over a lot, and they punished us like good teams will, but we still scored 63 points in the game. Off turnover, they scored 68. Our season average is 54. They scored 68 points on turnover. Their season average is 42.7. That's nuts. So they really went to town on our aggression. But the really big one was where the scores were. So points from defensive half. So we're a forward half team. We like to trap it in our forward line and then get re-entries and then score on the re-entries. That's the way we set up our game as a rule, but not in this game. So it really surprised me. It's not how I thought it would look differently the way we played. The Crows played exactly how I thought they would. So our season average for scoring from the back half, from the defensive half, is 36. In this match, we scored 66 points from the back half. That transition footy, people love it, but it's high risk. And it creates holes everywhere. And Adelaide were good enough at times to work their way through those holes. They equally did brilliantly. Their season average for points from defensive half is 25.2. And in this match, they were 43 points from the back half. So that just shows what sort of game it was. It was a back half transition game. I thought that was really fascinating. Just on centre bounce attendances, that was really curious. And this is why I was thinking about JJ. He only attended 25% 35% of the centre bounces, because Cozzy did more time. We know he had 4 centre bounces and 13. Problem for JJ, I reckon, is if he's swapping out for Cozzy, he goes to half-forward flank, and he doesn't look, to my eye, like a natural half-forward flanker, JJ. So, that might be a concern for him going forward in the team. The expected scores were 98-86, and that really our way, and that really surprised me. And just on expected scores, as you know, I've got an interest at looking in the boards that they bring out to the players at quarter time and 3/4 time. And this week on the expected score at the top, on the board that they show the players, I've talked about our key ones that they show the players are time in forward half, contested possessions, and inside 50s. They're the numbers that are always on the board. But in the last few weeks, on the top has been expected score. And I think we were down at halftime, but I'm not sure. And just one final thing, and because I know you like this, the board that sits in front of the players that has the messages to the players, I spent time trying to look through my binos to get it. It's pretty tricky. And I had to laugh at 3/4 time. They covered it up. The headers were... one was ball in motion, and then underneath that they had ball in motion, explore. Another header was speed transition, and underneath that they had blitz, barbecue, and some other stuff I couldn't quite see. I don't know what barbecue is, but I'll remind me to tell you about the board at Casey, because they had barbecue on that as well. Forward momentum was another header, and under that they had leg drive, long hit, pressure ball feed back, pressure back feed, and then finally, the final header was speed to defend, and I mentioned that before. Speed to defend, and underneath that was blitz, barbecue, and 2 other things that I didn't catch. And just one final one. There's a second board that has different information on it every week that they show at quarter time and 3/4 time. And one of the ones I caught on that, which I found really curious, and that's what if you can remember to remind me about the Casey board, was score trap in. So that's scores from re-entries, essentially. So trap it in the forward half, how many scores you get from trapping in the forward half and scoring when they kick it back to the wall and we re-enter. It was statistically a fascinating game, and that set of stats really points to a very high quality game of footy.
They're probably using code words and covering the board as a result of peeping toms like you.
There you go.
Because if you can see it, the opposition can see it.
Well, anyone sitting behind it could see it if they wanted to, because the back of it's clear. But I did laugh that they put the cover on at 3/4 time.
Isn't barbecue sauce Ted Lasso's favourite saying?
I don't know.
No, I haven't seen Ted Lasso.
Oh, you got to watch Ted Lasso. Gee, come
on. All right. Well, let's get into our listeners' questions. We've got a lot of questions about our defensive woes. So I'm going to read them all out because some of them are saying the same thing. Red Jacket says, thoughts on our defence against the Crows? I thought we were really poor, not just in the last quarter allowing 7 goals, but had they kicked straighter during the game, they most likely would have beaten us. That's 2 weeks in a row we have conceded nearly 100 points, 104 against the Lions and 93 against the Crows. Are you guys worried about this trend? Ryan D adds, the last time Melbourne conceded 2 matches in a row of 95 plus points against was in 2019, round 2 and 3. That is 102 games ago. Should we be concerned, or is this the price you pay in order to score? Monocular says, thanks as ever for the insightful podcast. Looking forward to it every week. Are you concerned about our defence, especially in the final quarter? There are some very poor decision-making from May and Lever in particular, and the Crows could very easily have snatched the game had it gone on for a few more minutes. Contrast this with last week when, even though four goals down with 8 to play, I felt reasonably confident we could claw it back when we did. Is there something going on in the headspace? Hard for me to explain the contrast. Maybe the Crows are better than the Bears. Lazy says, tough day defending in transition, and at times it seemed like we had the zone set up perfect, but they threaded the needle with some really good kicks. Is this a sign of what could be coming, and is there anything we can do to prevent this? Buddha82 echoes Lazy's comments saying, Brisbane and now Adelaide seem to have no problem walking through our zone. Is the book out on how to do it, or are we just a bit off in some way? As a side note, and removing my demon hat, from my spot on level 2, it's fantastic to watch when it works. Adelaide switched 2 to 3 times, stretched the zone, burst through with pace. Just sucks that it was against us. Sam6172 adds, hi guys, love the podcast. Quick question for you. Our normally stingy defence has conceded quite large scores in the last few games. Is that directly related to our refound scoring ability? Is there something structurally the Ds are doing that enables more scoring that takes away from defence, or have the last couple of teams just picked apart our backline? Garbo says, watching yesterday, it's once again become apparent we are susceptible when we can't force teams down the line for May and Lever to intercept. Crows did it via short kicks and marks and finding a target till they were in range. Last week it was the Lions moving the ball through the corridor, which they inexplicably abandoned in the last quarter once they felt the game was safe. Essendon, from memory, also refused to go down the line earlier in the season when we played them. It also explains why we struggle in wet conditions where intercept marking is more difficult. How can this be mitigated, or is this a potential fatal weakness and just the reality of how we choose to play and we knowingly accept this trade-off? Well, there's a lot to unpack here regarding our defence and Adelaide's and the Lions the week before and their ability to break through our zone. I'll get both of your thoughts on that, starting with you, Big Man, and then George, you can jump in.
Yeah, look, for me, I'll go back to, I've been talking a lot this season about not looking at each game in isolation as if it's some litmus test for the finals. I got a few things wrong in this game in terms of my thinking about how the game would look. A few things right. One of them was how the Crows would play, and they played great footy, fast footy, try to move the ball, were aggressive with their ball movement, good skill. What I said on the podcast last week, I'd expected the game that we would practice the way we played against Collingwood, because they play such a similar game, the Crows to Collingwood, which was to create density and bring our defensive back line up high and really try to slow the ball movement down of the Pies, which we were so effective. And I thought that that's what we would do to practice doing that, because that's what we're going to need to do against the Pies. So we did the opposite, really. We played the almost identical method as we did against the Lions, which we allowed space and we didn't press up. And so I think that was a really interesting decision by Goody to do that. And it was clearly, I haven't watched hardly any media, but I happened to watch like 5 minutes of 360 just before the show tonight. Robbo was saying that giving kudos to Goody for realising has to change things, and I thought, oh, good, they're finally getting it. And he said, oh, in the last 2 weeks, I think he said something like, oh, they looked and understood they needed to change things, and they've done that in the last 2 weeks, meaning the Brodie Grundy getting dropped, the different forward line look, and that sort of stuff. The point I'd make is what they're missing is that this is the way we're playing now, he would have been correct to say that if he'd said that at the beginning of the season. Based on the review from last year, they have done so much differently this year, the club. It's fantastic. And why I talk about it, not looking in the game in isolation, because we're still experimenting with our lineup, with our method, with how we're managing players. And I think it touches on the 2 biggest changes to how we've gone about things this season. We're experimenting way, way more with positions, personnel, with the fitness program, preparation for games, for example, when we stayed in Geelong. And most of all, we're experimenting with our method. And the other thing that we're really changed this year that, is the squad mentality and the way we're managing players. Last year and in 2021, you got dropped at Casey, players must have thought, that's it. It's the death knell for their season. They'll never get back into the ones. This year being dropped isn't the same thing, and the chances of returning are still high. So I really think they're taking a squad mentality with the selection. They're managing players through this period, like Charlie Spargo. I have no doubt he'll come back into the team in the next couple of weeks. Same with Brodie. All of that's a preamble to say the experimentation in this game was we are clearly trying to gear up our attacking side. We're looking at how we score. What we didn't do, which was really unusual, and I hope to see it as we get closer to the finals, is control the tempo of the game. We did not do that when they were coming at us in 21 and 20, first half of 20. We were brilliant at sensing when a team was coming at us and taking control of the speed of the game. We didn't bother doing that. And that says to me that at the moment they're just experimenting with getting our flow going and getting our scoring going, which is what everyone loves to see. But the risk of it is you defensively give up opposition good looks. So a classic example of what I mean of not playing tempo and instead of playing high-risk football as it relates to this question of our defensive weaknesses was we were 6 points up halfway through at the 13-minute mark of the last quarter. You might remember Bowie got a free kick on the wing after a kerfuffle on the wing. And, normally we would go safe down the line. If there was no short option near the boundary, a 20, 30-metre kick, we would kick long. He was on the dead wing. We'd kick it to inside 50 near the boundary line, punch it over for a, either mark it or get it over the line or create a stoppage. That's our go-to, and I think we'll go back to that. But instead, Bowie went to Jordan, hit Jordan up in the corridor in the middle of 3 Crows players, and Jordan went straight away and he crossed to Max, ended up going down, and I think that was the goal where Smitty got the 50-metre and went to the line. It was either that one or another one. So, it ended up with the goal from Smith that was taken off him for the point. That was such a bizarre, the one where he looked like he kicked it, but they had touch points. So that worked for a point. We scored. But if Bowie had missed that kick, and it was a huge lead, difficult kick to hit. In the pressure, we're 6 points up. They had all the momentum. We'd wrested it back because we'd got a goal. That would have been a turnover in the corridor, and our defence would not have been able to manage it. The ball goes in one-on-one. So for me, it's not a worry because it's like he knows that the defence will work. It exposed our defence to our biggest weaknesses, which I think is our one-on-one. Lever is not good one-on-one. May had a shocker one-on-one in this game. Tomo isn't great one-on-one, but all credit to him. He almost saved our bacon by putting that last contest he threw against for a point rather than over the line. So I think this is not about betting down systems, or this is not our model or method that will take into the finals. This is all about experimenting with getting a flow going, with getting the scoring going. So it's a long way of saying is no, I don't think the defence is a concern. Though, having said that, and there's a question about Maisie later, so I'll leave it till then. But, I think that the zone that they were talking about on the commentary is just really hard to, if you allow the game to move that quickly, it's just super hard to create a zone, to set up a zone. And you're going to have lots of one-on-ones, and that's what happened. And you're going to get exposed on the counter. That's if you attack, it's like soccer. If you attack, all the time and you're pushing hard, you expose your defence to goals on the counter. And that's what happened both ways. So I don't think it's a concern. I think it would be least of Goody's concern. He would have been disappointed, I'm sure, that we didn't get over 100 points. That would have been the goal in this match, I'm sure. So I think it's all about getting us going with our scoring and that run and carry. And that's what I've been talking about. That's what he will want come finals is a combination of that run and carry with our sound defence and our ability to control the momentum. So I keep, thinking about the first third of the season. Go back and watch the first 5 or 6 games. Just go watch the goals from those all the goals clips from the 5 or 6 games. That's how we're playing again, and that's how Goody will want to play in the finals.
George, anything you want to add to that?
No, just reinforce that the nature of this game was transition from both sides. And as Binman said, it is almost impossible to set up a defensive structure when the ball is travelling so quickly from the half-back lines for both teams. That also finishes up being reflected in the stats. All of a sudden we've got marks inside 50. It's because the Adelaide defenders were stuck halfway down the ground. We've got players suddenly in the open. Nothing's changed in the forward line, the way the structure's being set up. Nothing's changed in the back line. It's just the way the game's being played. But that's the way that the game's played by the top 4 sides.
Yeah,
that's what we're going to get in the finals. If you watch any of the other games on the weekend, it's a completely different way that the teams are playing. Really good sides, the top 4 sides, are playing a completely different game of football than everybody else in the competition. So this is what we're going to face. Adelaide are playing the same style. The fact that you're getting for both sides nearly 100 points scored for each side in the game is indicative of that. It's ruthless. It's a fantastic type of game to watch, but it's not just all on the defenders because they're suddenly giving away more than what they did in the past. It's the way Adelaide play that opens that possibility for us. We take advantage of it, but also for us, it's the same way going the other direction. You're going to give up more, you're going to score more.
And that's right. You can't, if you play the way we play, then you're going to expose yourself. We could have easily given up more. I just said on the turnover numbers, they're crazy. We don't give up those sort of turnover numbers. We don't get beaten on turnover, and we did in this game. That's because of the risk we're taking. So I agree with what you're saying about the top 4 teams, George. The one thing that I think, though, is the difference is, and that's why I'm so confident about us this season, is we won't play like that. Port play like that, Adelaide play like that, Collingwood play like that, and I think that's Collingwood's biggest vulnerability. We will we will slow the game exactly like we did on King's birthday. We will control the speed of the game against those fast-running teams. The other team in the top 8 that's most similar to Melbourne, I reckon, is GWS, who've got a phenomenally good defence and still play aggressive football. So for me, it's about Goody experimenting to find that right balance. And as someone wrote on Demonland, it was a good quote, I thought, is that for once the forward line saved the team, not the back line. But the back line will come back in. We've got, the back line's been heroes now for 3-4 years, haven't they? So, I think I take your point, George, and there's no question in my mind that Goody has become more, this year he's looking to be more aggressive. But I think that our defence is the best defence in the AFL, and we're not going to abandon that model to go with a shiny new pies thing, because historically it doesn't win flags. It just doesn't. Defence wins flags. And just one final comment about our scoring is that I was looking at the 2018 Tigers season as to compare it to Collingwood season this season. And what was interesting is the Tigers finished on top of the ladder, only lost 4 games for the season, and had the second most points for the season. We finished I think 4 games back from the Tigers. So we finished 5th and won maybe even 5 games less than the Tigers and scored more than them. We scored the most in the AFL in 2018, more than the Tigers, who finished 5 games unclear of us on top. The reason I raise that is that, this idea that Goody's some dour sort of defence-first Lion-esque coach just doesn't hold up to scrutiny. We were so aggressive that year. In fact, I reckon that was our weakness, that we were exposed on the counter. And I just see so many parallels to both the Collingwood side, but in particular the Adelaide side and our 2018 team, and in particular the way Goody had us playing.
Scroll says, really love last week's potty, fellas. You did an excellent job of dissecting the thrilling win over the Lions, so thank you. Would be interested in your thoughts on Maisie taking the kickouts. That howler in the third could have ended up costing us the match. I really don't think he can be trusted with it unless he kicks it down the line, but that may give away where we're going. Also think it was Tomo who twice placed the ball on the ground before hoofing it into the middle. Not sure how long we can continue that without telegraphing what we're doing. Keep up the great work, guys. Red and Bluebeard adds, thanks for your continuing great work on the podcast, guys. Best analysis going around. Why does Stephen May take the kick out? Surely we are better off with him as a marking option, with Rivers or Bowie or Salem taking the kick. Travi14 says, good win, and with May having an absolute stinker. Wells11 says, regarding Stephen May, I'm wondering if age and dodgy hamstrings are catching up with him, or was it purely an off day? He was sublime a couple of weeks ago, but even then his kicking, whilst it's always had its occasional flaws, is beginning to feel like a genuine liability. Every time he goes to kick it, I realise I have no trust it's going to a Melbourne player. We obviously need him. He's still a star, but my question is, do we need to take the kick-ins off him entirely, and or do we need to try to get him to handball now rather than kick, as we might do with someone like Max? And we've got a voicemail from Salty.
Hey boys, Salty here. Stephen May, he has a few Sam Frost moments each game where he directly gives away goals. He had one where the kick out obviously, but then one also where he went to spoil a ball, ended up spoiling Gawn. Ball went straight over and went straight to Taylor Walker, and Taylor Walker threaded one. It just seems to happen every week lately with Stephen May. I love the bloke, one of the great recruits of the club, but he can be pretty frustrating. Otherwise, just want to hear your thoughts on that, and hope we're lapping up another victory next week against Richmond. Thanks, bye.
I'll preface this by saying I absolutely love Maisie. He's Demonland sponsored player. He's absolutely integral to our defence, but I simply can't trust him kicking directly to a player unless it's long down the line. He's either over-hitting it to a loose player with the ball going over the player's head and out of bounds on the full, like we saw on the weekend, and then we lose possession, or he undercooks the kick sometimes, or makes the complete wrong decision like he did with kicking it to Rivers on the kick out, which directly did cost us a goal and a bit of momentum. He certainly had a stinker yesterday, and I guess no one would be more filthy about that than him. And at the moment, I don't think he can be trusted with the kick-outs. I'd much prefer the kick-outs be taken by Bowie or Salem. George, what are your thoughts on Stephen May's game and just his disposal in general?
I think there's a few things to unpack here. Firstly, the kicking, yes, I have to agree. It hasn't been good. As soon as he's taking a short kick, my heart goes, oh, please no, please no. Just kick it long, Stephen. Don't even think about it, but he always manages to
his
find...
KPI should be 70 metres down that way.
Yeah, exactly. And don't try and change anything. What was interesting was after those first couple of stuff-ups, I don't know that he took too many more. They got Bowie and Salem and Rivers doing the kick-outs for the majority thereafter. So the message obviously got through. But if we're talking about the defensive structures, surprisingly, the whole defensive structure didn't look good. Let's put aside the transition situation. I think as soon as you bring Tomo into the side, it just doesn't gel in the same way as what it should. Nothing against Tomo, but with Petty there, Petty knows when to go and when not to go and who to go to and all that sort of thing. Tomo's very
more aggressive interceptor, isn't he?
Yeah, he's just limited. What really struck me when I was looking at the stats was Tomo had 11 intercept possessions. and May and Lever had 4 and May had 5. It should
Tomo
be
played great. He played really well.
Yeah. But it's all the wrong way round.
Yeah.
Lever should be the one doing the intercepts. I think Tomo plays a very similar role to May, and when Tomo's in there, it just displaces May from what he does so well. I'd compare it to a basketball game. If you're playing basketball at a really high level with a zone defence, if you're at the front, you're depending totally on the guys behind you to fill the spots and do the right things at the right time that allow you to do other things. You bring in someone who doesn't know what the structure is and what the team mechanics are, and it just falls apart. It just doesn't do the work the same way. So it was difficult to watch because so many times Stephen May was out of position that he normally wouldn't be. And part
of that was to do with the transitions, but that's the whole. That's why Collingwood. My theory about why Collingwood play the way they play is because, as we talked about in 21 and the first half of 22, the only way to beat the Melbourne defensive model is to move it quick, is to get it. Not allow the defensive zone to set, because then your May and your Lever and your Petties can go to work, which is why I think, we'll play Collingwood the way we did on King's birthday, which is to slow them just enough to be able to get across. Yeah. But the problem with that fastball movement is that it exposes all 3 of those players that played then to one-on-one contests. And May had a shocker. Lever is just never been a good one-on-one player, I don't think.
He's got to be able to move freely between the two to do all the intercepting. He reads the play very well, and Petty is the real loss that he plugs all 3 holes, so to speak.
Exactly. He can intercept and he can go one-on-one with the player. Yeah. So, I wonder whether Maisie's still carrying his back stuff, because it looks like he's still struggling with the ground ball. He looked much freer in his movement last week, but maybe they had a bigger week on the track this week, and so he takes time to recover. He's such a big fella. But he had in all the time I've followed football, I've never seen a footballer who's such a good kick normally, who can butcher those 20-metre kicks under no pressure. I mean, remember the one in Brisbane that in the final last year that basically changed the trajectory of the match. And if we'd lost this game, I don't want to be unduly harsh on Steve May, but it would have been on him, really. I mean, there was a moment in that last quarter which I thought was, they'll do the tape and he'll get hammered, but maybe he's fresher. It was the 9-minute mark of the last quarter. It was a really high ball on the wing, and he made the cardinal defensive error. He went up, left his opponent, bloody Tex Perkins, on the ground, didn't do anything to the ball, let it get out the back to Tex, not Tex Perkins, Tex, and it got out the back, who then kicked to McAdams. And then he doubled down on that defensive error by not running with Tex. And I couldn't believe it. McAdam handed off to Tex, who kicks from 40 metres. That was really, really just poor. And then, and of course, he's just the shocking miss to Rivers. Like that, those 2 things in the game cost us 12 points just through sheer, it kept them in the game. In that, that was critical in the third quarter, but that goal to Tex just was like, that's not on.
Yeah, and there was that one in the final quarter, I think it was their second last goal, where their player, I don't know who it was, had marked Keys maybe, had marked at 50 metres, and Tex ran alongside him and took the ball and kicked the goal.
That was the one. That was McCann. That was the one.
I was screaming, just get on, get on. You could see it coming from a mile away.
That's his man. That's what I mean. That was in the same contest. He let the ball get out the back. Yeah. Tex bloody marks it, doesn't even jump. And then Tex, who's slower than me, I reckon I could outrun Tex, and I can't run. And he just let Tex get the handoff from Cadam.
And it's not just the letting Tex get it. Everyone just in our defensive 50 just stopped. No one went back to the goal line. Someone's on the goal line, then there's no goal.
Yeah.
I think that comes back to the structures as well, that people just. They were out of sorts. They were out of place. They didn't have the backups that they normally would expect. Petty wouldn't have allowed something like that to happen. As simple as that.
No, and it's
So-
you're exactly right, George, about the structure, because that's why I'm confident that this is a defensive blip and it's about trying to get our offense rolling, not worrying about our defense, because normally we would have a goalkeeper back. McAdam's not by himself, is he? It doesn't matter. If we do lose the ball, another defender like Petty gives May a chop out and saves his bacon, but no one was back there. That's really unusual for Melbourne. That's why Collingwood and Adelaide play. They push up so high, they take the risk that on turnover there's no one back. And we got caught on exactly that scenario.
Well, the MCG can be a cruel sea. Do you see what I did there, Big Man?
Yes, very good, Andy, very good. Just another comment about the way they picked through us, and also the way Brisbane picked through us, is that it really, there's another couple of factors, and one of which is what I've talked about. Spargo not being in the team is a big factor, and I think it's easier to think of that high half forward role as wingers. If you think of them as wingers, not forwards, I think it conceptually easier. And the big problem without having Spargo in the team and Nibbler, and if everyone's not doing that defensive running, it's the holes that they fill that stops that tic-tac down the ground, those passes. And the best example of that, the Smith goal that they kicked with 4 minutes left to go, 4 minutes 30 on the clock, was a perfect example of what I meant. He was allowed to run off the halfback flank, from the halfback flank, and take a handball received from Keys. And they got that goal. It was critical timing of the goal. Daisy called it a lapse in concentration on the commentary. But that's Spargo's and Nibbler's role, and the defensive running from Hunter and even Gus and JJ and Langers. Their job is to fill that hole, to make it not possible for a player to run from the halfback flank and take a handball receive on the half forward flank. That all team defensive running, not just Spargo, but everyone, when we're on, there's no way we allow that to happen. My sense is we allowed it to happen because it was such a fast running game that you can't keep up unless you're slowing the game at all. So that creates that opportunity and that overlap handball that we're so good normally at disallowing.
Big Mac Jr. asks, anyone else get shades of 2022 round 19 versus the Bulldogs with this game? Feels like Goody wanted to create a shootout to kick the offense into gear pre-finals. When it happened last week, you take that as possibly a once-off. When it happens again and happened in 2022, you take it as something planned. At least that's how I saw it. Take learnings from 2022. Goody is looking to kickstart the offense like we did the same time last year. Have to hope we put it all together and don't fall off a cliff like we did last year. Maybe they are thinking the formula worked last year. They just didn't have a fit list. Now, Big Man, have we discussed this enough? You're our resident tactician. Has Goody gone more offensive in the past couple of weeks?
Well, that question I was going to ask actually before, and I was changed my mind, but to put that question before the defensive one, because what Big Mac just said is exactly what I think. And it's like, even though it didn't come off last season, it's easy to forget how aggressive we were in the first half of last season. We should have been 6 or 7 goals up against Collingwood, for instance, at halftime. Similarly, we were against Brisbane. So at this stage, we were starting to be more aggressive. I think in counter to what Collingwood is doing. That's absolutely, I think George's point is exactly right. That's how the game is going. It's going fast, and so we want to be able to do it. And I think your point, George, is a really good one in the sense that if we're going to win the flag, we have to score more than, even if Collingwood do give up scores because they're aggressive, they're still going to score enough. So we're going to have to score 80, 90 points, I think, to win most games. So we do need to be able to score. And so I think Big Mac Junior's spot on there. I totally agree with that comment.
All right. Got a few questions regarding our opponents yesterday that our listeners wanted answered. Lazy asks, I've got another question. It might need someone who's watched a lot of Adelaide, so hopefully a good film watcher like Big Man can help. What is it specifically about Adelaide's game style that troubles the top 4 teams but can't get it done against the mid-tier teams like Essendon, GWS, Richmond Bulldogs, Suns? Is their style suited to playing against the teams that like to full press? Demon WA adds, keen to hear Big Man's thoughts on the Crows last quarter. Do you think that Burjo had them doing a loading block even though they probably missed the 8, or was it just pure hunger? So Big Man, what's your view on the Crows, in particular their credentials against the other top 4 teams and how they ran out the game this week?
Oh, I agree with what George was saying before. I see them playing top four footy. I think that Nix has got them playing the right way of footy. They've got good quality right across the list. I reckon take this to the bank. They're going to beat Port next week for exactly that same reason, that they will really expose Port's defence. I reckon it's a shame, real huge shame for that Rankin's not playing. You hate to see any player get injured, and so. That probably dints my confidence a little bit. But I reckon they're a really, really good team. I reckon they'll beat Port. They're definitely on the up. They've got the players. They've got a good list. They've got the right game plan. Their system is really strong, and they are super fit, and they keep talking about it. They keep reiterating it, which is the Burgess thing. And as for those, even Nix, he reinforced it again. He talks about it every week. He was making a point about, as I mentioned before, the dimensions of the G, their running power and fitness levels. He backs them in. He said in the presser, I knew we would keep coming. And I'll remind, we had this conversation last week. So GWS, George and I were talking about that GWS Crows game. They were completely gassed and ran out of energy in the entire second half. They only could manage two. This team that nearly ran over the top of us in the last quarter, last week could only manage 2 scoring shots in a quarter of football. They completely were out on the legs. And so that was clearly to do with the fact they were in a loading phase. I have no doubt they're in a loading phase. And I think that they think if they get in the 8, they're a shot of winning the flag. Nick said as much in the presser. So absolutely, there's no question in my mind that, it's Burgess we're talking about. He's their fitness guru, and he's the person who's really introduced this sort of program into AFL footy. So of course they're doing it. Just go back and look at the highlights of the last half of the GWS Crows game. Compare it to the last quarter that they just played at the MCG. My estimate, I think I said last week, their target game will be the Port game. I heard Sanderson on the radio talking about the showdown. He said there's nothing like it in footy. Remembering Sanderson coached the Crows. He's good mate. Hinkley was coach in his first year at Port. He said, look, we can't be friends for this week, honestly. And that the people hate each other. The teams hate each other. Everything the Crows will be doing, they will have been spewing they didn't lose this game. They were clearly more wound up than I thought they'd be for the D's game. They'll be even more ready next week. And they're a serious good footy team, and they back themselves into run. One of the great things about this match, and Goody didn't talk about it, was the shortest press conference for a winning team of all time.
Yeah, it was pretty short. I did watch it.
25 seconds. Laconic. That's correct use of the word laconic. But we are super fit. So I was so proud of the fact. That's my point about being able to them coming over the top. We didn't allow them to come over the top of us. That's what I would love to see the media talk about, is how well Melbourne ran that game out. The pressure shows that we've still got a bit to go for our tank to be at optimum level, because our pressure dropped off a little bit, but we really did keep running right to the end. We're only going to get fresher and fresher next week and then the following week. Well, both teams are super fit and looking great, I reckon.
Our next question is about that. And says... players from both sides were absolutely exhausted at the conclusion of the game. For Melbourne, how much did our lack of run in the last have to do with an extended 10-day break and the conditioning that comes with consistent week-on-week football? It would seem to me that whenever a team has an extended break, they tend to look like they're running in treacle during the subsequent game. We didn't have a 10-day break,
I think we ran it at it okay, but there is every chance that we were still doing another block of heavy training, because we did have that 9 or 10 days, and maybe
played Friday,
that's been picked up on is that's exactly what's happened in our last stretch of 10 days between games, is when we've loaded in between. And next week I knew you were sick and you didn't have time, but there was a quote from Uze was on Debrief, interviewed a couple of weeks back on Debrief, and he basically talked on Debrief exactly about the loading period and called it a mini preseason in the middle of the season. So if you think of a mini preseason in the middle of the season, of players trying to play the following week after doing a full mini preseason and see it doesn't impact their running power. Of course it does. And that's why Essendon, why the Crows' ability to be completely gassed one week and then not gassed the next week. So I thought we ran out the game okay. I'm not sure about what you guys thought.
No, not as much to the point where we look like we're running in treacle.
Not like we were against GWS, for instance, where we looked like a real battle.
Radelaide says there's simply nothing better than a lad from Melbourne walking into his job in Adelaide on Monday morning after beating the Crom. I live for days like this. Gus has been huge for us in Clary's absence. MFC Twitter posted the following, and I feel it bears repeating and talking about on the podcast. The tweet from the D's has Gus's stats from his last 8 games in the midfield. 27 possessions, 24, 24, 25, 24, 25, 29, 26 disposals. We didn't know how long Clary would be out of the side, and if you had said to me that he would miss 9 matches, 11 or 12 probably by the time that he returns, I would have been rocking back and forth in a corner in a fetal position, I think. And to have Gus step into that position and perform the way he has along with the likes of Sparrow and JJ and Vines, who we're going to talk about in a minute, is just fantastic. We're lucky to have a midfield that runs so deep. George?
Yeah, I think this is the 3rd week in a row that we've talked about how important Gus has been. Those numbers that have just been quoted are exactly, they're so consistent across that whole period. I was just reminded again how fortunate the coach is to have a player like Brayshaw who's capable of filling those holes. You're trying to replace Clayton Oliver, is probably one of the better players in the whole competition. I was just reminded of a little clip that's on Moneyball where the coaches are sitting around the table and they're going, how do we replace Giambi, this great hitter that they had? And they're all coming up with other options, and the solution that they decided on, which was successful, was we recreate him in the aggregate. Brayshaw in the middle is probably not going to be as good as Clary is in the middle, but you put a Brayshaw in there with a Sparrow, with a JJ, and with a Viney, and all of a sudden you've got the same and probably even better than a Clary on his own. But Gus has been fantastic. He just seems to be in everything, not just in the middle, but around the ground as well. He's still fighting right through to the very end. He's been fantastic for us. So, Goody's a very lucky coach in one aspect of having this sort of player available to us.
I could not agree more, George. And I'm wondering, as the bit of junior basketball coaching I did, and I know you did a lot of coaching, I always loved the players who, didn't really matter whether they were how good they were, but the ones that just kept trying and maybe put the hand in defensively or deflected the ball. And I'm thinking of Gus in the last 90 seconds or even the last 2 minutes. We lost control of the ball in the middle of the ground and he just reached out to tap the ball, and it was enough to stop them being able to move forward. And it was a small thing, but it was just Gus all over, I thought. I think the other thing about Gus in the middle that it's worth, in terms of the defensive stuff, is that I totally agree with you, George, but one of the problems, one of the flow-on effects of not having Oliver, and it's so easy to forget, many would say he's the best player in the AFL. He'd be in the top 5 players in the AFL. So it'd be like taking a Neil out of, Brisbane Lions or taking Nick Dacos out of Collingwood it's phenomenal we've done so well in the centre. But one of the flow-on negative effects of not having him in there is he would have been in the centre in that last quarter, allowing Gus to push back. And he's so clever at reading the ball, when I think we really miss Gus's defensive nous, because if he was freed up to be a sort of quasi-utility halfback flanker, Gus gets to good spots and intercepts and reads the ball well. You put him in the centre, he can't do that role. So, I forget all the time, because we've been winning and because we've been doing okay in the centre, we're doing really well. It has a massive impact not having a player of the quality of Oliver in the team.
The other thing is that Gus's output has enabled Petrarca to go forward effectively.
Yeah, exactly.
We wouldn't have considered that, quite frankly, I think last year. You didn't want Petrarca anywhere other than the middle, and all of a sudden we've got a midfield that's holding up and winning games still against top 4 sides. simply because we've got players like Brayshaw who've picked up the mantle, Viney who's picked up the mantle in a big way, JJ and Sparrow have all gone in there, and we really haven't lost anything in a
well,
sense.
particularly when you add, like, you would have loved Cozzy in through there, wouldn't you? That would have.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah. How awful it is for an opposition coach. You go, beauty, they've taken Petrarca out of the middle, but look what they've put in there.
Yeah, well, exactly like the phrase you've used about him. He's a shock trooper. When they use him like that, he's going to do something. He's going to have an impact, Cozzy, when he's around the ball.
Bigfoot says, Jack Viney was massive once again. Such a beast, gives 1,000% and leaves nothing on the field. His last quarter was immense. 10 disposals, 6 contested possessions, 4 clearances. I know we're all from the centre bounce, 4 inside 50s. Jack he's had a massive 9 weeks since Oliver was sidelined. In round 10, after the Port Adelaide game when Clary got injured late in the game, Oliver was leading the very scientific Demonland Player of the Year award on 127 votes. That was an average of 12.7 a game. That he was leading from track on 109, so an average of 10.9. And then Viney was in third, and he was a ways back on 50 votes, an average of 5 votes around. And as a refresher, the Demon Player of the Year award is based on 3 random posters giving their 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 votes each week. So a player can get a maximum of 18 votes to their name each game. So since round 10, Track has received 90 votes, which is an average of 9 votes out of 18. And Viney has polled 91 votes with an average of just over 10. So clearly Jack has stood up and flourished in his own game, as opposed to his first 10 rounds in Clary's absence. And that last quarter was just huge. It was huge last week, George.
Yeah, and the Demonland statistics are the be-all and end-all of these sort of things. Don't listen to the Brownlow medal counts. They're run by people who are incompetent. So, yeah, that gives you a fairly good idea about how good Jack's been playing in Clary's absence. He's just been amazing. He just wills himself to the contest time after time after time. And again, like Binman was just talking, in that last 90 seconds of the game, the number of times he was in there just being in the contest. What really amazed me in terms of statistics was Jack Viney had 1 tackle for the whole game. You go, there's something wrong here. They've missed 2 dozen. But what he's doing is actually not getting statistics for actually getting in there, competing, creating the opportunities, pushing others aside so that people like Cozzy sprints out of the middle and everybody think it's fantastic. It's because Jack Viney's cleared the way for him effectively. He's been fantastic, just superb in the middle. Kicking the goal this week was great. There was I was in the middle of that the mark, right in the mouth. But he'd run a huge distance just to get down there. So it was
his
great.
Work rate was phenomenal. He did. I watched him track. I tracked him down the ground, and he was flat knacker all the way, and he was exhausted when he was taking that kick.
Yeah. So again, just superb performance from him, and that once again, it's because Viney's been able to pick up the reins along with all the others that's enabled us to do other things on the field, like particularly the Petrarca going forward.
He's been phenomenal this year. What do you reckon, fella? Do you think it's his best season?
So it certainly is from my perspective. I think the important thing is he's actually on the ground as well. Yeah.
So. I agree. And I think if you measure like his season in terms of impact on games, he's been, you could argue he won us this game and he won us, was a huge contributing factor to winning the last 2 games. He's awesome. And it's funny you mentioned the tackles, because there is a bit of a funny thing about the tackles. I don't think they're necessarily such a good gauge sometimes for pressure. They don't always correlate. So we dominated the first 15 minutes of footy, or on the scoreboard at least. It was 10 tackles to 0 at one point in the first 15. And as the commentators said on the call, that's because they were chasing our tail most of the time. We didn't have any need to tackle, which is like Viney. Viney gets the pill, other people tackle him. There was a funny Viney moment where he ended up, it was down on the half forward flank at the city end. He ended up with the Crows player tackled him, and the Crows player somehow ended up on his back with Viney on top of him. but it looked like Viney was injuring him the way he whipped him back into the ground like a reverse slam. I was like, there's no way he could get reported for it. But, even when he was getting tackled, he looked to hurt his opponent. He was just so good to watch.
Just proves Jack Viney is tougher than the ground beneath him.
Yeah, he's a tough, no question about that. And there's concrete below the turf at the G as well. Yeah. So,
Andy, what's your thoughts on?
Just refresh my memory. Were we talking in pre-season that this pre-season was his first full pre-season in a while?
First time wearing footy boots, I think.
Yeah. I knew there was something.
His kicking has improved heaps, hasn't it? Like there was one Viney moment. So one thing unexpected score, it doesn't pick up when we burnt quite a number of opportunities in that first 6 or 7 minutes of missed kicks inside 50 when we had free players inside 50. And at one point, I forget, it was either the first or third quarter, Viney missed. He had 3 players inside 50. He could have hit streaming through the centre and he missed it. But that was that was like he was doing those sorts of kicks regularly 2 seasons ago. But he's just improved out of sight with his kicking.
Mandy Lorian says, felt a bit empty after the win, but happy to take home the important 4 points. I don't want to even contemplate the negatives from the game yet, and I'm sure you'll cover them, so I'll go with the positives. Small forwards hit the scoreboard, Chandler 3 and Cozzy 2. Felt like Chin is way ahead of Spargo. Love the podcast, boys. Keep up the great work. And Chin started the season off with a bang. He played in our first 15 games for the year. After round 8, he had scored goals in every game for the season, including 3 bags of 3 goals and had amassed 15 goals, 3 behinds by round 10. He had a patch of inaccuracy in the 3 games against the Blues, Pies and Cats, kicking 3, 2 and 2 behinds, and then no score against the Giants before being dropped for the Saints and the Lions games. And this week he was back to his early season form, kicking his 4th bag of 3 goals for a total of 18 goals, 11 behinds for the season. So, big man, your thoughts on Chandler as our other small goal-kicking forward alongside Cozzy, and where does this leave someone like Spargo, who you mentioned? You said he'll be back, no doubt, in the small forwards equation.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's really better to think of, it's easier to think of Nibbler and Spargo as not as forwards because it's just less confusing about what their role is. And all you need to do is to look at, in particular, Nibbler, his heat map. He spends 75% of the game outside of the forward 50 arc. So, he's not really a forward. It's great that he's kicked 13 goals this year, Nibbler, and just had a fantastic game. So, people will think, oh, well, he missed that handball. He was phenomenal in this game. He was just simply great. His ranking was 11.8. His disposal efficiency was 77%. He had 8 score involvements, 2 tackles. He kicked a goal. From 1, 6 contested possessions, 5 inside 50s, 286 metres gained. So he had a much maligned player, had a great game. I joked at the game yesterday that if Nibbler had kicked like May, they'd be burning effigies of Nibbler outside the MCG. But he had a great game, but his role was like Spargo's up the ground. So I went to Coburg that game and watched really intently. I moved around a lot and I followed Spargo a lot on the ground. And I happened to see Spargo yesterday at the footy and I spoke to him about his game. And he worked so hard in that game, in the Coburg game, and he was spent. And at one point in the last quarter, I was standing behind their interchange bench, so I was right where the players were coming off. The players were coming off spent. I asked Charlie at the game, what was it like playing Coburg, because they're down the bottom of the ladder. He said it was just a really, really hard game, and it was a lot of running, and that he was spent. But he spent, pretty much 80% of that game outside the forward 50-metre arc. And so I think he will come back in. And one of the reasons why our pressure, our tackles inside 50 was so low is because we want Chandler closer to goal. He's a small forward. He's a small crumbing forward. That's his role. He hasn't got the tank to do what Spargo does. He hasn't got the tank to do with what Nibbler does, which is a big reason why they were able to transition the ball so easily, because that's the job of those high half forwards, is to make transition difficult. So in my mind, there'll be no doubt that we'll go back to our setup of Spargo and Nibbler as the high half forwards, and Cozzy and Chin, traditional small forwards closer to goal.
Who does he replace, like a Taj Woden?
Yeah, Taj Woden will come out. So, yeah, look, I wrote that on Demonland and asked, well, how will that work? Well, it'll work exactly the same way it worked for 7 games of the first 9 games of the season. That was, go back to round 1. What is Goody's best 22? He trains all pre-season with all of our plans. He has the full list available. The team he picks in round 1 is the team that he thinks is the go-to team. And in that lineup is Chin close to goal, Cozzy close to goal, pressure forwards, and Spargs and Nibbler high half forwards. As I say, better to think of them as wingers, not high half forwards, because then your sort of sense of their KPIs are different. But yeah, I have no doubt that that's what it will end up looking like come finals. But Spargs will one or maybe 2 more weeks at Casey, and he'll be back in that team. And Chandler won't come out of the team either, I don't think. But I'd be shocked if that's not what the forward line looks like.
I hold a contrary view in the sense that I think Chandler's benefited from his time at Casey simply because he was tired. Give him a couple of weeks down there.
Totally agree with that for sure.
He's come back, as Andy said, he's played 15 games, but Sparks isn't producing anything. I didn't see anything in the Casey game that would warrant bringing him back, unfortunately. He can run up and down the ground all day long, but against a team that's lost 18 now consecutive games, you've got to produce something to get him back in the side.
He'll come back in, and it's about the structure. It's the same question we're about to talk about Benny Brown.
There just won't be a place for him. That's the trouble.
There will be. Well, I'm willing to bet that he will come back into the team and Chandler, because Chandler, I was watching Chandler. Chandler is not fit enough to play Spargo's role, and he was sent back to work on his stuff. Chandler, that's what I mean about them managing the team differently this year. Sparg's the same. He has got his tank up. He's been doing that hard mini pre-season that Uze talked about. So he's one of those players, and it's going to impact the runners differently than it's going to impact the power players. So we'll see in the next 2 or 3 weeks whether you're right or whether I'm right, George.
We've got a number of questions regarding Ben Brown's performance and the makeup of our forward line, so I'll read them all out and then get your thoughts, guys. D Minion says, I know we almost kicked 100 points, but did it feel like we were playing a little short at times in the forward 50? Most of the time, one of Ben Brown or Rui was on the bench. I like the flexibility of Joel Smith as the sub, but I wouldn't mind seeing what he can do up forward for a full match. No need for you guys to analyse our forward line, but I can't help feel uneasy heading into finals, thinking we haven't nailed it down yet. Any of you concerned? Oh My D's adds was pretty ashamed at the crowd for giving Ben Brown a Bronx cheer during our match against the Crows. I was as well. Ben Brown seems to be one of the most maligned premiership players at our footy club. He gives everything for the Demons on and off the field, and he doesn't deserve that kind of treatment. BB takes the best defender week in, week out. He's often a strong field kick, can get up the ground, and even if he's not kicking goals, he's usually serving them up for others. There's no question he had a below-average game, but he's clearly being managed and trying to regain fitness. I think we just don't play to BB's strengths as a genuine lead-up forward. On Sunday, we butchered the delivery of the ball to BB by either kicking it over his head or dropping it short. Would love your take, gentlemen. D-Me says... thought it was a great effort by the Ds. My only concern is Big Benny Brown. He has started the last few games well, but drops off, presumably due to his body not being up to a whole game. This is not sustainable, yet we need the tall. Any suggestions? Travi14 says, what are the panel's thoughts on Ben Brown? Personally, I think he provides structure and a lead-up option up the ground. I know he didn't have the best game, but he gives us a good link-up option up the ground. It's not so much deep. There were a few times he provided a contest on the wing that our crummers got to, and we moved forward from there. And then when we swung the change with the sub at the perfect time, which is the perfect role for Smith. All in all, a good win and a very important one. Garbo says, what are your feelings on Smith? He was the spark we needed in the final term. Do you think he should be in the starting 22 over Brown? Shorty Short came in late with a question saying, g'day all, love the podcast, first time poster here. Question, even if you weren't a fan of Brown's game/numbers on the weekend, it is so clear that we need an experienced tall forward to take a key defender. lead away from others, run the patterns, etc. I thought Brown was vital to our forwards having the game that they did on the weekend, but probably was a bit slow with pressure and seemed like he couldn't keep up with the game. Smith made an immediate impact, but don't see him as the answer for a whole game. What do you guys think of the solution is? Persist with Brown, try Grundy gone, wait for T-Mac to be back, keep Tomo back and swing Petty forward. Keen to hear your ideas. Hoof-Hearted says, firstly, I just want to clarify that my question to George last week regarding Melksham was intended to come across as tongue-in-cheek. Secondly, love the pod. Keep up the great work, gents. Thirdly, in the post-match presser, Goody described Ben Brown's game as a little quiet. However, the commentators on Channel 7 mentioned how effective he was despite the stats sheet not showing this. In my opinion, he regularly provided a target and brought the ball to ground at one point in a 4-on-1 situation. I thought he was a critical tall target and provided plenty of aerial contest work. What do you guys think? Well, thank you, Hoof-Hearted. Read the clarification of your comments to George last week about his thoughts on Melksham being tongue-in-cheek, and I'll chalk that one down to problems with communication in text form. Often the tone can be misinterpreted or misunderstood, and that clearly happened in this case. But back to Benny Brown. He only had the 2 possessions up to half-time, and I thought he was much better in the second half, and I too didn't appreciate the Bronx cheers from our supporters. George, your thoughts on Ben Brown, the role that he's been playing, and perhaps you can also talk about the super sub Joel Smith and whether we play him as a full-time forward or keep him as a super sub as he's able to cover that forward or defence position if needed.
Well, that's an awful lot to unpack.
There's a lot there, but mostly about Benny Brown and the role he played.
Yeah,
so,
all right, we'll start with Benny Brown. I think Ben played his role very well. I can't see him playing too many games in a row coming up. He's got his limitations with everybody knows he's got a knee problem of some sorts. He's not a sprinter, and unfortunately, the way the game's played these days, with zone defences, you're not going to get the space in front that he enjoyed probably when he was playing at North Melbourne, where you had a whole forward 50 to be able to lead into. Forwards just don't get that opportunity these days, so he's trying to adapt to a different role of the forwards. I think he did the role pretty well, which was basically, and this is what we trained from right from the pre-season, when the ball goes to the top of the square, just bring the ball to ground. You don't see forwards getting the classic high marks in the goal square and things like that. It's an unusual situation. So just bring the ball to ground. He's limited simply because of his speed. His speed off the mark isn't great, so it makes it very difficult for him. He was involved in a couple of plays, very critical events during that resulted in scores. So I think he did everything he could, but eventually was gassed in the game. He can't run forever, and bringing Smith in the last quarter was critical because Smith was fresh, ready to go. He's tall. Took a great mark because he could get off the ground when the opportunity arose. Kicked the ball beautifully back into the middle of the goal square as usual, and there was Tajwa Woden waiting for the ball. I thought it was interesting, Smith as the super sub, because he was in that last 90 seconds or 2 minutes of the play. Smith was swung onto the wing so that he could get back to the defensive half in the event that Adelaide were able to get the ball forward. So Smith as a super sub is fantastic. Can play forward, be effective, play back, be effective, play a wing and be effective, all the aspects of it. I don't think we're doing Ben any favours at the moment, the way we set up in the 6-6-6 situation where we've got Melksham on the goal line and Ben Brown at the top of the goal square. Ben needs to be back at the goal line so he can, if there is an opportunity in the 6-6 situation, to be able to run out. He needs space to be able to run into. If you got him on the goal line, he's already got at least 3 tall defenders sitting in front of him, so he's not going to be able to get full use of it. I would prefer to swap the two, put Melksham out at the top of the goal square. He can spread out to the side, but give Ben the opportunity to better suit the way he plays. But that's just my personal preference. As the coaches think otherwise.
We have another voicemail from Salty in regards to Christian Petrarca.
Hey boys, Salty here. yet another Demons game, which you think might be relaxing, ends up being pretty tense towards the end. We seem to take the foot off the gas and let people back in when we really shouldn't. It's kind of frustrating. A couple of interesting observations. People often say that Fritsch is one of the most selfish players in the competition, and in particular in our team, but I thought Petrarca had a few opportunities. He had 5 shots on goal for 2 points, and he burnt his teammates really badly in the last quarter. Just sometimes I think Track can get a little bit goal hungry. One of my nicknames for him is the Hippo because he's hungry all the time. He's a fantastic player, but I think sometimes he can be a little bit selfish with the ball.
Now, I don't mind Track having a ping at goal. I just wish he would nail those ones on the run or those snaps a little bit more often. It would bring the house down. He just doesn't seem to nail those ones. He's fixed a lot of the issues with his set shot kicking aspect of his game this season. I think his biggest weakness is those snapshots for goal. And big man, is Petrarca burning teammates as Salty's posited there? Does he have the license to have a ping when in range? Is it a weakness in his game that he doesn't slot more of those goals?
I don't think it. No, I don't think so. I don't think I've ever considered him a selfish player. But I think I said earlier in the season, in fact, I'm sure I did, I'm sure that they've changed their direction to the players. And because players are taking shots, whereas in previous seasons they'd give it off. They'd give that last handball. And so I reckon there's an instruction. And I suspect it's to do with the analytics, is that, there's a player, sure, running next to you, you give it off. But there's a player free, Track, I just had a look at his numbers. Track is such a great footballer, but he is hit and miss with his kickings. I read out the disposal efficiency of Nibbler before, 77%. By way of contrast, Track in this game went at 61.5%. I mean, that's not elite, is it? It's not like Butters and that's his weakness, is that his incredible kick, brilliantly powerful and sees the ground. So he's got an incredible ability to kick depth and to weight his ball, but he butchers it as well. But my vibe is that they've under instruction to go for goal because partly if he's going at 61%, even if he's going to kick a 20-metre kick, he's only 61% chance of hitting it. He's probably no more chance of hitting that than kicking the goal from 45 metres. So that's my sense. There was that one example where he got it himself and he picked it up and he could have given that off 3 in that chain. But by the time he actually got the kick, he should have kicked it. He should have kicked that goal, but he was sort of unbalanced. And so the short answer is no, I don't reckon there's an issue there with selfishness. In fact, I don't think there's an issue with selfishness in any of the players, to be honest.
John Mnemonic says, this is definitely the week to only listen to the Demonland podcast. The Pies versus Port match of the year and fait accompli grand final talk is utter rubbish, and you could expect it all week and for the months ahead for the footy media. Vomit emoji. I came away from the game with my opinion reinforced that Brisbane will get the second spot and home final run into a grand final, good luck at Cardinia Park, Port, and Collingwood will not make a grand final. Collingwood should have been beaten comfortably as per usual, and Port crumbled under the pressure in the dying minutes, as they have done in the last 2 home preliminary finals. Two of the D's, Cats and Lions will be there on that last day in September, injury permitting. Their best is superior to the 2 ladder leaders, and it's unsurprising that it is not a popular thought given the hype from Saturday night's close finish. Do any of you 3 wise gentlemen on the podcast share these opinions and want to discuss and create a safe space from the media this week, or do any of you disagree? Now, Big Man, I know you'll have thoughts surrounding the media darlings Collingwood and their bride-to-be Port Adelaide power, so what do you say?
Well, do you want to hear my spiel about the Pies? I'll give you my spiel. But I just on that, I can't see. It just really is, I think, too hard to win it from outside top 4. It can happen, but like Geelong now, with having lost that game on the weekend, the big danger for me was the Crows. I think GWS are on the rise, but they're not ready yet for a flag. So I can't see a team outside the top 4 winning. I think if the Crows beat Port this week, there's a real chance that we'll finish second, because it'll come down to Brisbane and Melbourne. Brisbane have to drop a game for us to catch them. But if they do, I think we'll pass them on percentage because we've got the Hawthorn game and the Roos game. So we've got that opportunity. Hopefully that we'll take it to build that percentage. I don't want to play Brisbane up in Brisbane. So if we finish third
we'll talk
and
about
they finish second,
we'll talk about that in a second. So.
Yeah, that's a horror. But I think we'll end up finishing second. I mean, look, on the Pies, I just think it's, the hyperbole around them has created equally ridiculous expectations. The flag is there for the taking. I think everyone's drunk the Kool-Aid on them. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I don't want there to be any misunderstanding. They're an exceptional team, and that's evidenced by their fantastic home and away record this season and last season. But are they a great team? In my view, not even close. As I mentioned, but a little earlier, the great teams have a body of work and results that they can point to as evidence of greatness. The Pies might become a great team. Sure, they've got all of the pieces of the puzzle, but facts are facts. There are 3 other serious contenders for the flag. The Pies have only beaten one of them, and that's Port, and I don't rate Port. I rate Port the 4th of the top 4 teams. By way of contrast, we've beaten 2, Brisbane and the Pies. They've played 3 finals in this iteration of the Pies team under McRae. They've lost 2 of them. The best you could say in terms of evidence of greatness is after a dominant home and away season, they'll finish top this year, which is all power to them, and it's fantastic. And we'll have back-to-back top 4 finishes, which is impressive. But we'll have, as we mentioned before, this will be our 3rd top 4 finish in a row. I'm not saying we're a great team, but as I said before, we've got much better claims to greatness. We won a flag in 21. We were second last year, second top 4 again this year. I think a real chance, as I said just before, to finish second. And if you're talking really great teams, the 2018 Tigers team provides a really interesting comparison to the Pies, I reckon. That team also had a dominant season. They only lost 4 games for the season. They finished well on top. They went into the finals that year as $1.70 to win the flag. The Pies are $2.75 now, which is ridiculously short. The Pies will likely lose fewer games than the 4 games that the Tigers won. So that's really impressive. And they, with all jokes aside, they deserve enormous credit for their consistently high level of performance in this last season and into this season. It really is impressive. The difference is the Tigers were the reigning premiers in 2018, so they actually had a claim to being a great team. Collingwood haven't done anything. They haven't achieved anything yet. So I don't want to hear them a dynastic team or great. Just give me a spell on it. And as we know, that Tigers team did become a great team. They won in 2017, 2018. They won in 2009, struggled in 2019 and 20 flags to add to that 17 flag. In 2018, and this is where the lesson that the AFL should be looking and the media should be looking towards, despite their dominance in 2018, the Tigers were way better than the rest of the competition that year and being hailed as all but unbeatable. As I said, they entered that final series $1.70 to win the flag. That's before even a finals game was on. They didn't win the flag that year. They didn't even make the grand final that year. In 2018, the 2 teams that did contest the flag, the Eagles and ironically the Pies, finished the home and away season 2nd and 3rd on the ladder, having won 2 and 3 fewer games respectively than the Tigers. By the by, an interesting stat, as I mentioned before, we were the highest scoring team that year. But all of that's by way of saying is that this idea that it's a lock for the Pies is just historically there's no support for it. They're a good team. I think they've got specific vulnerabilities, and I think we are the best team in the AFL to exploit their vulnerabilities. And as I've mentioned a few times, their major vulnerabilities, the risk they take on offense. It's why they are so often in close games, because they, for all of their attacking intent, they offer goals up on the counter, and teams take them up on that, and we will. And that's why I think we're really trialling, like Big Junior Max said before, we're really getting our offense rolling, and we'll get our defense back into shape, and we'll stop them scoring, and we'll hurt them on the counter. So I think they're an impressive team, the Pies, but I keep coming back to the most overrated team I can recall for a long time. I don't reckon the Tigers were overrated in 2018, by the way. They were a fantastic footy team that year. But a lot has to go right. So even if you rate the Pies, a lot has to go right from here to there. If Dacos does his hammy like Rankin just did, you can almost say goodbye to the flag. We can win the flag without Oliver. That's how good we are. That's because our system's better than theirs, I reckon.
El Diablo asks, do we prefer to finish second, third or fourth? Finish fourth and it's the MCG against the Pies. Finish third and we play Port or Brisbane at their home ground. Second looks unlikely, but there is still a chance, as Binman has said, which would be a home final against an interstate team. I believe we are travelling better this year at the G, so my guess is that we prefer second or fourth. We don't want to finish third. Now, if we can finish second, I guess that's my preference. I don't believe we can. I'm still torn on third or fourth. I don't like having to win in Port or Brisbane in the first week of finals, and initially fourth place against the Pies to snag a home prelim seems to be the preference. But if we were to lose the game against, if we finish fourth and lose that game against Collingwood, it means we will be faced with a preliminary in Port or Brisbane, and I really wish we had that extra win in the bank that we coughed up in the Alice, and I guess against Freo. That would certainly give our chance to finish second a lot easier. But George, what are your preferences? Obviously second, so you can not talk about that, but in third or fourth?
Obviously second, but I think the reality is that the top four is almost set. I think, Collingwood will finish top. There's no doubt about that. They've got percentage and games ahead of us, ahead of everybody else.
That was decided on Saturday night, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. I think Brisbane and Port could change because there's only the one game difference there. I don't think we can get above either Brisbane or Port as it turns out to get high to third in any case. I would be preferring to play Collingwood in the first qualifying final than having to go up to Brisbane or to Port. So it becomes simple. And it becomes even easier to understand when you look at who those respective teams have got to play. Collingwood have got an absolute dream run. They play every game now in Melbourne. They've got one game against Essendon at Marvel Stadium, I think, in the very last round.
Really? They're playing at Marvel?
Yeah, something ridiculous. Yeah, every other game is at the MCG. They've got an away game against Hawthorn, but of course it's at the MCG.
I bet you Essendon aren't going to accept a change to the MCG for that. If they wanted
and on that, George, just going back to the Tigers, it's worth remembering that Hardwick said a really big factor he reckons in hindsight for them not for losing basically in the prelim to the Pies was that they had too many soft kills, that they weren't ready for finals, that they rolled into it, and that the winning. That's the downside of going in every game thinking you're going to win.
Yeah, and surprisingly, that's what's going to keep those soft kills are what's going to keep. I think the top four positions where they are. Brisbane have got to play Gold Coast in Gold Coast. Well, that's no big deal. It's just down the road for them. Fremantle, Adelaide, they play in Brisbane. Collingwood's away.
Yeah, they play Collingwood at the G, and so if they drop that game.
Yeah,
I reckon we'll finish second because Port play. If Crows beat Port this week, Port then go to Geelong and play at Geelong, and Brisbane are likely to lose the game against Collingwood. You reckon? In which case, then it'll come down to percentage. If we win our remaining games, it'll come down to percentage between us and Brisbane.
But at this time of year, getting the percentage is
it's hard,
pretty impossible. They've got the easy games as well. They've got St Kilda at home as well for Brisbane. Port have got Adelaide this week. Geelong, they've got to go down to Geelong for that one. They then play the Giants at home and Fremantle and Richmond.
Yeah.
So each of the sides has probably got two easy kills.
Yeah.
And in order for us to move up the ladder, we need 3 kills sort of thing, and for us to basically win all 5. So.
Yeah, I reckon there's I think Brisbane are a really good footy team, and I reckon they're better than Port. But that game that they play Collingwood, George, is at Marvel, and I think that's a big chance that Brisbane will win that game because of the size of the ground. That Collingwood won't be able to exploit their pace advantage the way they would at the MCG. So,
and I think the other thing that's going to happen, certainly with Collingwood, is they'll be resting players. Why wouldn't you? Your 2 games and percentage clear. And I think we will finish up in the same situation ourselves, that we're not going to be able to improve our situation all that better. So here's the opportunity in the next couple of weeks to rest players.
And that raises an interesting integrity issue not thought of, because I 100% agree with you, George. We're better finishing fourth and playing Collingwood in the first week than getting in a lottery of going to Port or
Brisbane.
And in our control over that will be percentage ultimately. If we end up on the same points as all three of those teams, the way I've done my ladder predictor, about 12 different variations, is us, Port and Brisbane. If Brisbane lose that, Port lose this week and Brisbane get beaten by the Pies, and we win our remaining games, we'll finish all on the same points. I think it was 68 from memory, and it will come down to percentage between the three teams. So maybe we won't go for the kill in one of those games if we want to keep our percentage to finish fourth.
Yeah.
We'll experiment even more.
I think we will, and there's a few players I think could, even at this stage, gain some advantage by having a week off. We've been pushing certain players like the Vineys and even Max.
Yeah, I reckon Max. Bring swap Max out in the Roos game and bring Brody.
Yeah, and bring Brody back in. Yeah. And you might see the same thing with Ben Brown. Here's the opportunity. By that stage, T-Mac may well be available.
Maybe.
So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see a few managed players in the coming weeks.
Yeah, it'd be interesting though. Like with Collingwood, you start to get into the closer you get to finals, you don't want to get too close and be mucking around with your lineup, do you? So they'll be in a position. It'll be interesting to see if they do it actually. Manage players, that is.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk Casey. Casey ventured deep into the northern suburbs to take on the lowly Coburg Lions, who have yet to record a VFL win this season. The Demons were never troubled in compiling their comprehensive 42-point victory over the hapless Lions. What I wouldn't give for a cruisy 42 victory, but then I guess I'd be disappointed that we didn't win by 70 points. Casey fielded a dozen Melbourne-listed players, including 3 Giants in Brodie Grundy, Will Verrell and Kaya Farris-White. Grundy's well-documented move to the VFL to work on his forward craft could hardly be termed as an unqualified success in his first official hit-out, but he had his moments, finishing with 1 goal, 3 behinds, 12 disposals, 4 marks, 4 tackles and 12 hit-outs, mostly while stationed on the forward line. His goal came just before half-time when he plucked the ball out of the ruck in a ruck duel, and he could easily have scored more given that he missed a few gettable shots at goal. The forwards all pitched in with Matt Jefferson, Josh Shackey, Charlie Spargo all chipping in with 2 goals each. Andy Moniz-Wakefield was lively and always looked dangerous. The standout player on the ground was Luke Dunstan, who amassed more than 40 disposals in a game for the second time this year, and along with James Harms, who was also prolific, collecting 33 possessions. The Demons had the benefit of an outstanding defensive display from Michael Hibberd, who is returning from injury. He amassed 30 touches, took 9 marks in a role as the general of the Casey backline in a performance that should see his early return to the AFL ranks. Hibberd worked well with young rookie Deacon Smith, who benefited from playing with someone of his experience, and he played with great composure in a 21 disposal display, probably his best for the club. Both of you watched this game. George, Big Man, you were there. George, do you want to start with anything you noticed?
Yeah, it was really difficult to take much from this game simply because this was the 18th game in a row that Coburg had lost. The conditions, Bin Man can probably explain a bit better, but on the telly it was certainly looked very swirly. So getting how much you can take from goal kicking and things like that is difficult. I don't think we're going to turn Grundy into a forward in any short-term process. At least he was out there. I think to this, my opinion, he's there to have a rest more than anything else. But we spoke about that last week. I was really impressed with Hibberd down the back line, 30 disposals. He was just in there, everything. Less impressed with like the Dunstans and the Harms in the middle. You expect to get 40 possessions against a team that's lost 18 games. It's not surprising, but Hibbo was a standout. I was really impressed with a couple of the younger kids. Again, Adams showing plenty. Verrill in the ruck was doing quite well. Jefferson just needs to spend a summer in the gym and then build his tank up a lot more. He's got some real talent though. mystery illness for the week was Howes, who didn't play. I haven't seen anything about what's wrong with him, but the previous week he played very, very well, so I was very surprised that he wasn't out there. So unless one of the Demonlanders has seen something else, let us know. The interesting one was Zane Dersma was also playing for Casey. He's one of the ones who's been touted as the top 5 pick and given Fremantle's position on the ladder at the moment. He's going to be within our target range, so that'll be an interesting scenario. He certainly shows some real talent. He's playing up that higher level. This isn't obviously TAC Cup type stuff or whatever it's called these days. He's got some real talent, this kid. So it'll be interesting. It's interesting that we're playing him at the moment in Casey, getting a good look at him and what he's capable of. So we'll see.
It's if it's different going to the MCG and then going home and watching it on television, and it's different on television. I can tell you what, it's different watching a streaming on the AFL app or on the PC than going live. It was beautiful. I remember growing up as a kid, and Coburg was like the roughest. Dandenong and Coburg were the two hardcore, and I suppose Port were the hardcore VFA teams. So that's the first time I've ever been there. There's a few things I'd say just about the actual game. They worked really hard, Coburg. They tried really hard. They really looked to switch. So we were working really hard. It was swirly at times, but wasn't that bad. It was just kicking for goal a lot of the time, I thought. That's funny, this narrative. Partly it's Melbourne's fault. About followed him. I went at first quarter on the boundary line on the wing behind the interchange, but the first couple I moved down specifically to watch Brodie. He worked super hard. There were a few times where he worked hard to leading lanes. He got ignored a few times. I thought, if they were looking to develop him, they could have got it in quicker. It's really interesting to see the Casey setups and structures mirror ours. So, for example, how they use Charlie, he worked super, super hard up and down the ground, did a couple of really classy score assists, a beautiful kick to Brodie at one point. But in terms of, obviously Coburg are down the bottom of the ladder, but this idea that the VFL, it is such a lower intensity, and it's like they worked hard and it was a tough game for the players, but there was some players at Coburg that, I reckon there was a number 8 who was a defender, and he was on Jefferson for most of the game. And Jefferson took a beautiful mark right in front of me in the goal square. So he's just a natural reader of the flight of the ball. So I think we got something there. But as you say, George, he's got a while to go before he builds up his strength. But the player he was playing on, I remember in my junior footy, he was looking for the cheapies out the back as a defender. So we're talking a pretty big golfing class between AFL level and down to Coburg. The other thing is it was small ground. It's the 50-metre arc but almost touched the centre square. So everything was compressed. The standouts for me for the Ds were, I thought Jed Adams had a brilliant second half, and bloody big boy. Varel looks a big boy, but I was really surprised. As I said, I stood behind the players where they come on and off for a while. And Brodie's taller than Will Varel, and I would have, for some reason, guessed the opposite is true. But they were standing next to each other, ready to come onto the ground. Goody was there with Tim Lamb. Brownie was there. And Stafford was there, and Stafford looked every inch the Coburg craft brewer with the sort of flat cap and thingo. But as I do, I like to look at the boards. And so the Casey board at quarter and half time had time in forward half. So at the end of the first quarter, it was 51% our way, 49% their way, which was a surprising stat for, the gulf between these two teams. Territory that they had was re-entry, 36%, trap and bib, it said to the board. Territory was another focus, one brain and score next. And this one, so quarter time, I couldn't work out what this meant. So SC plus lock in, 44% us, 62% them, right? And I was trying to work out what the hell that meant, score and lock in. And I couldn't for the life of me work it out. And I ended up, just as it happened, standing next to Stafford at the 3/4 time huddle. I said, "Oh, g'day. Are you Greg Stafford?" He said, yeah. And I said, "What on the board? What does SC lock in stand for?" And he said, "Score." I said, "Well, I know score." So he was a grumpy bugger. So he wasn't very helpful in letting me know what that was. But I worked it out later because it was on the board for the Crows game as well on another board. So it's scoring and locking it in, the ability to get it trapped in and not the re-entry, but to score once it's locked in our forward zone. So if our score locked in board game would have been really low because we only had the one tackle inside 50. That's how you get scores. You lock it in your forward line, you get a stoppage and you score from the stoppage. Conversely, the Crows were brilliant at that score lock-in. But I find that stuff fascinating because it's the same messaging for the Casey team as it is for the seniors. And the other one, as I said, was the re-entries. So it was great, beautiful day. Really glad I went. When you're that close, the boys, even at that level, they hit pretty hard. Just one player I really, really like. I think he's got a ways to go to get his tank to AFL standard, but Seston kicked a beautiful banana kick, which was just pure footy. The way he picked it, read it, and then straight onto the boot banana. It was just a quality finish. So, and Mona's Wakefield had his best game that I've seen him play for Casey. And so I thought he was actually quite impressive and played most of the game through the middle, which was impressive. And on Dunstan, I thought he was terrific. That's the best game I've seen Dunstan because his kicking was a bit more impactful than it often is. It's hard to see 40 average. He must be averaging what, 35 possessions, George?
Yeah. It's the same every week. But, how they get a game.
Yeah, if Viney gets injured, Dunstan maybe comes in for him. I don't know, but it's hard to see him getting a game in the ones. But he's plying his trade with effort. And just the final one is White and Munro. I just love them both as footballers, and I haven't seen them up close like that. So it was great, really great. I'm really pleased I went out to the ground.
All right, before we talk changes on the injury front, the only player on the injury list not currently listed for an extended stay on the sidelines is Harrison Petty, who missed Sunday's match with broken ribs. He may or may not return this week and will no doubt be listed as a test when the injury report comes out tomorrow. That's Tuesday. In other positive injury news, Demons assistant coach Adam Uze was on Triple M Footy before the match, and he mentioned that Clary was, and I quote, progressing really nicely. He joined in training this week. He'll up the ante next week, meaning this current week. Knowing Clayton, he'll throw his hand up against Richmond, but it's more likely the following week. Well, we've heard that before in recent weeks, but if true, that's very positive. It means he could be available for the match against the Kangaroos in Tassie, and if we don't want to risk him, then possibly for our round 22 match against the Blues. However, the very same day, Goody mentioned in the presser that he was still 2 to 3 weeks away, so who the hell knows when Clary will be back. Singer says, I thought Tomo had a fantastic first quarter today. Selection will be interesting, particularly if Petty is available. Hibberd too. Does Tomo hold his spot? Could you see Petty being tried forward again and Tomo keeping his spot? Newport 34 adds, would love to see Tomo play the remainder of the year down back and bring Petty back in as a forward. George, followed by Bimman. Are there any changes you would make this week?
For me, it all depends on the state of play with Clary and Petty in particular.
Clary won't be back this week.
Yeah, Clary won't be obviously, but Petty, if Petty's available, I don't think they'll risk him. I think they'll give him another week.
It's a perfect opportunity too. Isn't it? Not the perfect opportunity, but I mean, you get double. You reward Tomo for his effort. You don't drop him. It's to drop him after a decent game again after his great game in the Pies game would, you get into that player management space a bit, don't you?
Yeah, it's I can't see us really changing anything this week from that perspective. I wouldn't even bring Petty back in as a forward. I think we'll get another week out of Ben Brown. That'll be more than enough. And then the North game is where we have the opportunity to rest a few of those sort of players should we need to. So really can't see any changes this week.
The only change I could maybe see is this is probably points to him either not having a good game or I didn't see him. Did Laurie play in the Casey Coburg game?
No, he didn't.
Right. So he was an emergency that last week.
That's right,
So, but that's weird. I didn't see any report about him being injured, or was
he was probably an emergency.
Oh, of course, yeah, he would have. That's right. So,
so
he
Smith
still would have played at Coburg, though, couldn't he? No. Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay. So that's the previous day he wouldn't have played and then be emergency. So maybe he might. The only change, I think, let's say Petty, they do give him another week. Maybe the only change might be to bring Laurie in to give him a run if they want to give him senior time and Wowie to come out. I thought Wowie played all right on the weekend, but he made some errors. I thought he dropped Sitter of a mark in that first quarter, which was a pity. He had a serviceable game, but he would be the only player I could see coming out, I think.
Well, what about a guy like Michael Hibbard? Remember the Richmond had a player called Dustin Martin, who Hibbard has lined up on before.
That's true. Well, so maybe Wowie out for Hibbo, but then, you probably have to take a defender out.
I would think that Hibbard's probably a better match for Martin than what Tomo is, surprisingly.
But didn't McVie get Martin
in the Pracky match? That was in the
Pracky match.
Who played on him in the first time we played him? I can't remember.
I thought it was McVie, but. Hibbo's the same. He was awesome, actually. His leadership was fantastic on the ground. He was really vocal. That was really pleasing to see, is how hard the AFL players worked in that game and the voice. They were really, really vocal, and you don't hear that, obviously, when you're watching the streaming. But particular Hibbo, he was so vocal on the ground. You could hear him from almost wherever you stood. But he's such a, I think... I don't know whether player management. I wouldn't mind seeing him be rested or managed through the VFL for another week or so as well, because do you want to use up your petrol tickets against Richmond? So I don't know, but yeah, he might come back in, and if so, then maybe a defender comes out, and if so, I'm not sure who that would be, but hopefully not for Tomo for his sake.
We did have a question come in late. So I should have done this in the Casey part. At the break of Gorn said, if it's not too late, my question is Shaki near the cusp of selection? I'm not sure we can carry someone like Brown for much longer if he's not hitting the scoreboard. I also think Shaki could play the second ruck, which would leave JVR as a stay-at-home forward. You guys watch Shaki play at Casey? George is shaking his head.
No. He was actually really impressive in this game, but he looked like a really impressive VFL footballer. Yep. I think the problem for Brown is exactly as George said, is that he's just not physically strong enough in the contest, in the big sort of aerial thingos. I reckon it's just going back to that conversation about Brown, he's been asked to do a really tough role because he's getting the donkey work up the ground and also being told to go deep and getting smashed. So I thought his work rate, even though his numbers were low, that goal that he gave off to Gawn, and his work rate was phenomenal. And once, there's no question in my mind that the best lineup, or what good he's looking, is 312s, and Grundy will come back in and he will provide that donkey work up the ground and allow Brown to stay closer to goal. And I can't see Shaki.
Shaki hasn't got the physical presence necessary for AFL.
That's right.
He scores plenty of goals every week simply because he's 190
and he's a beautiful kick,
and he's a great kick.
And he played well in this game.
He was the best forward, without a doubt. But most of his goals come from uncontested marks.
He uses it well, and he's field kicking as well. So I just don't think he's physically strong. I mean, you can't have him and Brown. It would be and Brown's ahead of Shaki, isn't he? So
yeah.
All right. That answers that. Let's get into the preview versus the Tigers. The Tigers have won their last 6 of 7 matches, with most of their wins against bottom 10 teams, and their loss was a massive one against the Lions by 81 points. They have a sniff of finals footy as they currently sit outside of the 8 on percentage, but with the Giants and Bulldogs playing each other this week, a win against the Demons will have them back in the top 8. So I'm sure that will be at the front of their mind. Engorged Onion says, I'm tipping a loss against Richmond and the resting of a couple of players. If it eventuates, what reaction will we get from the pessimists, and what reaction will we get from the optimists, and what does it mean for our season? Pew 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 says, the Tigers worry me a little bit. Early in the year, I was hoping that this return game against them would be a cakewalk, as their season would be in tatters by now. Now, for the second week in a row, we're playing against a team with their season on the line and a sniff of finals. Whilst I would love to end their season, I don't think we will have an easy task of it. What do we need to do to put them out of their misery? Love the podcast, and I'll take my answer off the air. B-Man, followed by George. What do we need to do to beat the Tigers and put a dent in their finals aspirations?
To be honest, I was much more worried about the Giants game, much more worried about the Crows game than this game. We match up super well against the Tigers in large part because we've based our game plan around their game plan. So it's two teams playing very similar. I'll be really curious to see, whether we take that attacking run and gun style that we did against the Crows and to a lesser extent the Lions. But I suspect maybe it's an opportunity to get that defensive stuff right again and also look to push. Of course, the Tigers will be desperate and they'll play hard footy. I don't think we should be or will be managing anyone this week. I actually do think we'll win, but I actually think it's really important we win this game. So we've got to keep winning. I don't think that we've got now's the momentum. It's a great matchup because how similar the models are. There's just a fully territory team, even more so than us. Get it forward, kick it off the ground. Time in forward half, contested footy. Very similar style, but head-to-head, if with the same style, we're just way better. So I'd be really, really disappointed if we lose this game. I don't expect we will. Much more confident this week than I have been the last 3 weeks, to be honest. I think, as I say, we match up really well. The other good thing is that they had just another emotional win. I mean, we have two, I guess, with 2 in a row, but they weren't that impressive last week. I think as I've said, there's a massive gap between. Well, if there's a big gap between 4th and 5th, then there's a big gap between where we are and 8th and 9th, and they're not the Tigers of old. Would be my call, and if they beat us, I will be worried, to be honest.
I watched the game against Hawthorn. Hawthorn absolutely pants them and
ran them off their legs.
Absolutely ran them off their legs, and I think that's going to be the difference. The Tigers of old are exactly what the problem is. Their good players are now old. That they play Martin almost exclusively in the forward line because he can't run anymore. Cochin is barely going through the motions at times. They're totally dependent down their back line on Grimes, and Bolter's actually playing some good footy down there. But up forward, they've got Jack Riewoldt, and that's about it. They're depending on their smalls to be able to go.
Jay Bolton's really got to go.
Oh, he's fantastic. He's their best player by a long shot. But
Baker, I really have got Baker's fantastic.
But like in this game against the Hawks, if you've got players who run with him, like the Hawks were doing for 3 quarters of the game, they were 6 goals up with 1 minute to go in the third quarter, and they were still 5 goals up halfway through the last quarter. But stupidly, their coach went defensive and started putting Will Day down the back line instead of continuing to play that had been playing the way that had been so successful for them for the first 3 quarters of the game. They just stopped attacking, and that was the way to beat Richmond. But they went defensive, and they paid the price for it. The other thing was, which was noted, was the Tigers scored 2 goals in the first half. It was when James Sicily was off the ground.
Who played an amazing game.
Who had 10 intercept marks. And we've got exactly that sort of player. We've got a couple of those sort of players in our defensive lines that will simply stop them. So they haven't got the scoring power in the absence of Lynch up there, and Riewoldt on his last legs in any case. So, we're far better positioned than what they are. Their real big positive is for the last 6 weeks, they're the best team for forward 50 stoppage goals. But
that's their game method. Isn't it?
Yeah. But the other advantage is they haven't got Nang Curvis. He's out still, so they're depending on Soldo, and I think Max will give Soldo an absolute bath.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting, George. I hope. Then I think we will. I think we'll get our defensive shape a bit better. They don't move the ball I mean, they don't move the ball as quick as Hawthorn. Hawthorn move the ball super quick and look to spread. They don't move the ball anywhere near, of course, as quick as the Crows or even when they're on. They just don't have the leg speed to carry the ball.
Got Rioli. Rioli's about the only one left.
Yeah, exactly, who runs off half-back flank. So I'm hoping that we'll get our defensive structure and our intercept game going and combine that with the fast running and fast transition that we saw on the weekend, which will mean we'll have less congestion up forward, but we'll be bouncing off half-back flank. And I really hope, one of the things I've loved this season, in particular the last 3 weeks, is Rivers and the way he's now been given license to run and carry. And, he really adds an offensive hit from the half-back flank. And so I really hope that we look to attack them, get our defensive shape right, but really look to use our advantage of our leg speed and run them off their feet. And I could see this game being a blowout and, us winning by 40-plus points because, one, the percentage is important. Two, I think we're probably only a week or two away from being close to our optimal, level of running power. Maybe, we're at maybe 70, 80, 90, 80%, say. So we love to beat the Tigers. We've had a good rivalry with them, and I reckon we'll give them a good touch-up.
40-point win. There you are, Andy.
40-plus.
There you are.
40-point plus, Andy.
Well, you know that if that happens, I'll say, why didn't we win by 10 goals?
A good team would have won that game by 638 points.
All right. Well, let's leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week, hopefully discussing another famous victory, but not another close one, please. If you want to listen to the show live, then please head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Jackie Spam, Red Soxman, Bean Lander, Engorged Onion, Red Leggers, and Demonic. Thank you to our voicemailer, Salty. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Kiwi D, Red Jacket, Ryan D, Monocular, Smurf, Lazy, Buck Naked, Buddha82, Sam 6172, Garbo, Scroll, Red and Bluebeard, Travi14, Wells 11, Big Mac Jr., Demon WA, What, Say What, Radelaide, Bigfoot, Mandy Lorian, D Minion, Oh My D's, D-Me, Shorty Short, Hoof-Hearted, John Demonic, El Diablo 14 at the Break of Gorn, Singer, Newport 34, Engorged Onion, and Pew Pew Pew. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman, and thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from, and read it out on the next week's show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
This